All right. Good morning. Howdy. It's bright and early, Saturday morning for me, Eastern Standard Time. Welcome to another show. If you're catching this live, and I see that there are a few of you waiting, good morning to all of you. Thank you all for coming. Hopefully, this does not disappoint. Haven't done a video covering JRobin in quite a long time. Not since that one where I ranted about him for quite a bit, and then promised that my content would focus on the his behavior rather than his arguments. So this one is going to be a little bit of a violation of that because while I won't be addressing his argument, because most of what's going wrong with him in this particular video is his behavior and the way he's kind of approaching this stuff. Um, he's having a conversation with Roger, who I believe is a PhD candidate in philosophy, and this is not the first time the two of them have had a conversation. But Roger brings up some pretty interesting points that I'll probably ramble on about. So it should be interesting. This one's not too old, I don't think. But it popped out a little while ago. There's another one as well. I was kind of torn about which one went, so I'm probably going to end up covering both. Not today. This one's a little long. I think this particular conversation goes on for a little over an hour, so we'll see how much we get through here. There's another one that was done after this that Clubhouse debates captured between JRobin and Billy Martin. And Billy Martin he seems like a pretty sharp guy. So that'll be a fun one to watch. That one's much shorter, and I'm pretty sure in that one JRobin just kind of goes full Beckel. Although in this one with this conversation he has with Roger, he's kind of going full Beckel, and I'll get more into that whole the Beckel comparison later if none of you know who that guy is. So yeah, let's see. What do we need to do here? As usual, I'm using a different headset. I hope it sounds okay. It is a Bluetooth one, so hopefully it's coming through all right. I don't know if it's picking up anything in the background. Let me take a look and see how I sound. It's a little on the quiet side, but it's not bad. All right. A little tinny. If anybody's got good recommendations, I'm still on the fence. Like I said, I'm using new equipment. I just purchased a MacBook, trying to do this. So far, so good. Adjustment hasn't been that bad. I don't know if I'm going to keep this though or not. The biggest problem has been, which I should have looked into before, has been the notion of ports on these things. They're just naked. So if anybody knows like a good I don't know, like spare headset that can actually plug into a Thunderbolt port, a USB 4 port, let me know. Otherwise, let's see here. Let's play the intro and then officially give this pig a kick. Okay. All right. Let me switch out the proportions on here, and yeah, I think we'll get this started. Hopefully, I didn't just lose sound or free StreamYard. It can be a little ticked off occasionally. Let's see. Let me say a quick hello to everyone here. Michael Deaton, thank you for being here. Davids is here. Zintuix is here. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Crispy Dew, is that how it's pronounced? Crispy Dew. Thanks for showing up. Clive Gordon, always good to see you. Maria McIntyre, nice to see you. Pleasure. Victory Joker, good to see you. How have you been? And the ever-present Spooky right here, who is an omniscient presence on YouTube. So always good to see you. And Warren. And John Rapp. Good morning to both of you. Okay, so we're going to get this started here. JRobin talking to Roger. If I can get it to play.
I'm talking about. I'm not speaking meaningfully about anything, okay? Because I don't know what the words I'm using are referencing.
And I guess the thing that I'm kind of objecting to, or the inconsistency that I'm pointing out, is why is it the case that we have no morally sufficient reason for understanding these kinds of evils, but then we have like very clear, precise understanding of what God's exact intentions and plans are when it comes to like whether or not we should give the death penalty to Franklin Floyd, right? Like that just seems very asymmetric in a particular respect. And I think that it's very unclear why there would be that kind of asymmetry. Because
is this a question, or is this a problem, or
this is a problem? This is a problem.
So
this is a
but
problem.
it has to be more than a question, right? Because there are certain things we do know, there's certain things we don't know. What's the problem here?
No. Okay.
I'm failing.
So what,
I'm failing to see the problem. I'm failing.
Okay. Well. Okay. Well, I'll assist you then. So
Okay.
the issue is that
It's a shock that JRobin is failing to see the problem when somebody's bringing up something critical about his conception of the God of the Bible.
It seems like the way in which you're repelling the like, why did God allow my 10-year-old to be raped, is, well, this could all be a part of God's plan and we don't really know.
Everything that happens is a part of God's plan.
Right. Like God has morally.
Us talking right now is a part of God's plan.
I will give everybody a trigger warning at this point. This gets exhausting quick. I don't know that I've listened to this one the entire way through. I think I have heard most of it. But it's been a little while. I heard it back when it first came out. It is amazing to me the number of times that JRobin needs to input into the conversation when someone like Roger makes a point, and then JRobin makes a statement that perfectly illustrates what he just said, but JRobin seems to be saying it in a way as almost as if it's a challenge to what Roger just said. It's a little odd. It just kind of, I mean, maybe that's not what he's doing. Maybe he is trying to be helpful, but given his tone and his general demeanor, it just seems like maybe he is completely lacking in self-awareness.
Okay, well, God has morally
Someone giving to charity is a part of God's plan.
Okay, yeah. Well, God has morally sufficient reasons for allowing this to occur, right? And then what I'm saying is, I'm like, okay, but
okay, yeah.
Hang on. Sufficient reason. What do you mean by that?
Like in the grand scheme of things, there are reasons that outstrip the reasons for not allowing it to occur. Like, so we only see things.
I don't know what that means.
JRobin does know what that means. Because the reasons why it's necessary for it to occur is God's plan. That's been JRobin's. That's JRobin's point. So they're already getting into this like touchy situation, this touchy problem with that Christians will have. And here's how I see it. If any of you have ever seen this kind of observation, made this observation of Christians before, it can affect other Christians very negatively. I've seen it happen. I remember back when I was a believer and new believers that would be challenged by this when they saw this behavior in others. But it was so easy for a Christian to declare to the murderer, or to the rapist or the drunkard, that this thing that you're doing or the thing that you have done goes against the will of God. What you have done is a sin, right? It is against God's will for you to be behaving in these ways and to perform these actions. Simple and direct, right? That Christian seems to know precisely what God wants, right? Now, if they're talking to the perpetrator, it's just clear and direct. God doesn't want you doing that, and you did it, and now you're going to face the consequences of it, and you better get right with him or else, right? Easy. Right? Now you'll have to face consequences here from man's law, but there's also God's law you need to worry about, right? You don't want to go to the fiery pokey place for all eternity. Now, let's say that the person that you're talking about is a murderer, right? And now you have to talk to the person, the survivors, right? The relatives, the loved ones of that perpetrator's victim, right? And they're wondering, why would God allow this to happen? Why didn't God deliver my child or my loved one from this murderer? Or maybe not directly, but couldn't God have stayed the murderer's hand or provided a good Samaritan or something like this? Any of these kinds of things. And what does the Christian say then? Well, we don't know why these things happen to some people, but it's part of God's plan. And that's where things get really trippy, right? Because, and I knew Christians back in the day that would wrestle with this because they would be very, very. I remember somebody telling me, they were like, I am a little bit insecure about doing that kind of thing, right? And what they started to realize was that they actually started to back off on the first part. I'm less inclined to tell people to judge people in the name of God, right? Like, now I know what the Bible says about this, and it's pretty clear that somebody who murders another person is obviously doing something wrong. But when I have to turn around, when I can declare that so forcefully and securely, but then have to use this weird kind of explanation to the people who are grieving the loss of that murderer's victim, and have to go into, well, it's all for the best. It's part of God's plan. The reason He allowed your daughter to endure all that horrible crap, or your son that horrible crap, is because reasons. And maybe we'll never know, or maybe you'll just find out when you're in heaven. And then I'm sure you'll be satisfied when you get there, right? That's not great, right? Right. And especially in contra, and what you have to do is kind of wait and one. And this is sort of what Roger is starting off with. Roger is starting at what he's beginning in this conversation, or I think they've been talking for a little while. This is Roger's issue with this. Is one of the issues that he's getting to is this asymmetry in sort of the moral proclamations that Christians can make about that God. And well, as you'll see as we play out, JRobin is not having it.
All my position is that God allows these things to happen. Okay, those actions are still bad in virtue of the fact that they are out of accord with God's prescriptive desires are and prescriptive will is. But God's overall plan of human history will be achieved. So I don't know what else the other stuff you're talking about is.
Okay, I'm just gonna make a brief. I'm gonna make a brief point about this, and then I'm gonna kind of continue my original case. The brief point that I'm gonna make about this is that it seems as though there is an asymmetric appeal to divine psychology that is sort of misplaced.
What do you mean asymmetric? There are things that we do know. There are things that we don't know. God has chosen.
But like, how could you know if God if God's plan is
not to reveal certain things?
Okay, yeah, but if God's plan is utterly mysterious, then
I don't even know what that means. What do you mean it's utterly mysterious? God has revealed certain things about His plan. Like everything that has happened in history has been a part of God's plan, so we know that much. Plus other things that God has revealed to us about things in the future. Plus certain things about what God wants to happen in certain circumstances and what God does not want. There are plenty of things that we know about God's plan. It's not utterly mysterious to the fact that we don't know absolutely anything about God's plan. We know certain things about God's plan, and then there are plenty of other things that we don't know about God's plan. But where is the contrast?
Yeah, well, so far the plan is to tell people not to murder, and then to tell people in the event that someone does go and murder, that their loved one was lost because of God's plan. So this entails some real problems. God's plan is to make sure that it's known that what God wants is for people to not murder each other, right? But in the event that people disobey what God says and go and murder people anyway, and people wonder, well, why would God allow that to happen, right? There are circumstances that we know of where people, and this is Christians' fault. Right, this is entirely their fault. You don't have to go to a lot of congregations, but if you find some of the Christian congregations that have moments during a worship service where they will open it up to hear quote unquote testimony, right, the testimony from people, and this is an opportunity for somebody to stand up in the middle of the congregation. Maybe they don't stand up, but they say something that they felt during the past week or so. They felt like it was a moment from God, right? Or a little lesson that they learned, right? And they can get kind of fraught, depending on the kind of church that you're in, because you could have somebody say something that theologically just falls flat on the floor, and you can watch the pastor squirm. They're awkward as hell. But this point that JRobin and Roger are fighting over, right? The notion of, well, we can know God's plan, right? Or we cannot know God's plan. There are people that will tell people, like, I felt like so I was driving down the road and a deer jumped in front of me, and if it hadn't been for this feeling in the back of my mind, I felt that God told me to hit the brakes early enough to avoid that deer. And if I think if I hadn't had that, if I had hit that deer, it would have seriously harmed me, maybe even killed me, right? So Christians talk about this kind of stuff frequently, where they feel like they had a subjective experience in which God helped them, right? I had it happen too. I was in a fairly semi-serious car accident in 2015, and you could tell the faith traditions of anybody after I told them to it, like, I would tell them the car rolled this many times and narrowly missed this thing, and it hit this thing, but it didn't manage to hit the windshield, and I was able to crawl out, and I was fine. I was remarkably unharmed. I'm not saying I'm like, done from, from Unbreakable. I'm not Bruce Willis's character from Unbreakable. I was clearly shaken up, and that event sent an adrenaline rush through me that I did not enjoy. But that experience, right? If I tell people about that, I'm like, yeah, I wasn't even harmed. I think I cut the back of my hand on a piece of glass that fell off one of the windows. The reaction I get from people, God delivered you. From some people, oh, God has a plan for you. The universe has a plan for you. That was preordained. Somebody's watching out for you. These kinds of things. And these are things. Some of these things are just automatic, right? Or they're kind of just little cliches that people say. Oh, so God's not done with you yet. God's got a plan. Special things are coming. That kind of thing. If you believe that kind of stuff, okay, that's one thing. The flip side of that is that when something bad happens to you, that was God too, right? Christians have a hard time with this, right? Like it was, and the weird thing is that they don't really embrace the bad side of it. They don't embrace it like the Vikings would, right? It's your fate. This is your time to die. Embrace glory, Valhalla awaits kind of thing. They don't really have that mechanism, right? And so when they mourn the fact the seemingly senseless murder of a loved one, and they're like, well, why would God allow this? God just saved me from a potentially horrible car accident just 2 months ago. And yet now my child has been murdered by this crazy who should have been told by God not to kill people. And when Christians have to reconcile that, they can't. So, yeah.
Contradiction. Where's the problem? Because I don't have a problem with not knowing what God.
No. So what? No, it's the appeal to divine psychology in particular circumstances where it appears as though, for instance, we might have.
This is a good point coming up. I agree with you. Look out for number one. I think JRobin really is kind of a waste of time, but his conversations with a few people, especially like this one with Roger and the one that he has, the other video with Billy Martin, I think are both worth listening for the points that Roger and Billy Martin make. This one's pretty good because now he's getting into this this other aspect of it that's very interesting that does get ignored. Is this sort of appeal to God's psychology that Christians make, right? We know that God doesn't want you to do this, but then when it comes to these sort of incidental horrible things that happen, all of a sudden God's too mysterious to fathom.
Bible passages that and where certain actions seem impermissible. Okay, so like rape or torture or things of this kind. Okay, like suppose. And when I say, well, here's this passage and then here's this event, God clearly doesn't like this according to the Bible. Why did it happen? And then what you'll be like is, oh well, this is part of God's plan. This is fine. And so you appeal to this.
No, hold on, stop.
See, now he's not going to like this. So when Roger throws out the word, God allowed this to happen, so it's fine. JRobin is going to object because he understands that a potential implication of the use of that language maybe it's just flippantly excusing something as good, right? And he doesn't want that to happen, right? Even though that is kind of entailed. But this is the thing that amazes me is that JRobin is not, and a lot of Christians are not. They're not really aware of the way some of their little pat explanations and their defenses, their apologetics, their theodicies, whatever, come off to other people when they try to say something like this, right? What I'm getting from this entire thing is that good is relative, and I think that's going to become important to everybody else as JRobin continues to flail on this thing. Space Lord, God's omni traits doesn't make sense to me. It seems to me that an omni be God would not allow any suffering at any time. That would be greater than having reasons to allow it. Yeah, and that's actually kind of the strange thing, right? Because an omnibenevolent God, the definition of omnibenevolent ends up coming smack into the Euthyphro, the dilemma, which is something that Christians really don't have a way of escaping, right? Other than to say, they'll wind it back and try to say, oh, well, you can say that God does it because it's good, or, God is the good, right? And so, and that's essentially what they'll decide. Well, if that's the case, then it's kind of arbitrary, right? God just, whatever God does is just good by definition of the fact that God does it. So that just makes goodness arbitrary. Like, no. Goodness is his nature. God is goodness in and of itself. Okay, but that gets you back to the fact that you've got a God that is confined by goodness, that is in some way instantiated as an objective that God would not be able to, those are lines he can't color outside of. So you still kind of run back into the same issue. This idea that he would have reasons to allow it doesn't apply if you're doing the divine command theory, right? Right. So if you're appealing to a sense of good that's somehow independent of God, then you would just have to say that God does things that are good and bad, or God only wants to see good, but certain incidental evils occur that God won't prevent or can't prevent, right? And that entails a lot of things that a lot of Christians don't want to deal with. So if you try to get into the idea of like a more, where divine command theory can be stretched to its absurdity, which is, well, whatever God does just is by definition good, well, then it's just purely subjective. It's purely arbitrary, right? And the notion of appealing to God to reasons falls apart. God doesn't have to have a plan for it to be good. It just is good by definition of that thing being defined. Anything that God does is good. If God rescues a kitten from a tree, that's good. If God breaks that kitten's neck right afterward, also good. Right? So if they're, well, no, God wouldn't do that. He wouldn't do the second one. Okay. So how would you? Okay. So he wouldn't kill the kitten, but he would allow someone else to do that. And the justification for that, the explanation to a child or an adult, the kitten's mother, is that that was part of God's plan, right? And when you say that, that brings up the idea that for people, like, oh, a plan. So there's a reason that this needs to happen. That's how people think, right? And then people like JRobin will then try to escape from that commitment. Oh, well, by plan, I just mean as part of his decretive will or his permissive will or whatever. I'm gonna bring up these theological concepts that they don't seem to be capable of explaining very well. They're not particularly intuitive, and they are very, very definitely not convincing to anyone. So they definitely don't bring anybody comfort. Tell someone who's lost a loved one to a horrible, violent crime that the loss of their loved one was part of God's permissive will. Right? Like, you better hope that person's totally on board with your theology, or that person will likely slap you.
Stop.
Or
Or
like that's why he
part of
allows
God's
it.
plan, it doesn't make it morally fine. It doesn't. Sorry.
So God allows bad things to happen, right? It's not fine. It's not good. But God is allowing bad things to happen in order for his plan, which is some kind of ultimate good, to come to full fruition. So he has reasons to allow the bad. What could those reasons possibly be, given that he is an omni-propertied ultimate?
Okay, well, we could go into a whole problem of evil discussion here. I
yeah,
think
we
that
can,
my point,
but it's not going to go anywhere. I'm sorry, it's not going to go anywhere.
I think that the point is sufficiently made, which is that there's an asymmetric appeal to divine psychology, where it's like, I know the mind of God when it's convenient for me, but when it's not convenient for me, I sort of like throw my hands up.
It has nothing to do with convenience.
How do you know that God wants? How do you know that it's permissible for collateral damage to occur? Well, no. How do you know it's permissible for collateral damage to occur in Operation Desert Storm under the Clinton administration, but you don't know whether or not, like on the grand scheme of things, it was bad for like my 10-year-old to get raped? Why is there
everything that happens? I'll tell you.
That's a tough question to answer. Why? Yeah. How do you know? You're like, you can confidently stand there and say, the collateral damage in a war was definitely not, that was definitely bad. But then when you're trying to speak to the survivor, to the survivors of someone who's, the loved ones of someone who either survived a vicious attack or rape or was killed, and tell them like, oh, well, that happened because of reasons. God's a mystery. Who knows? He has a plan though. Just hold fast in your faith.
I'll say this again for the fifth time, Roger. Everything that happens, everything, good or bad, when it comes to God's prescriptive will, is a part of God's sovereign decree.
Yeah. When you have to search for a term that's that cumbersome, his sovereign decree. I don't understand how this is any different than what Roger's wrestling with. I had someone tell me my grandparents dying from COVID was God's plan. I guess God planned on me being an atheist. Yeah, well, and we heard that before, like right, like in reaction to mask mandates and stuff. Some of the people that just kind of lost their shit and decided that when health officials are like, hey, if you go into a building, maybe put this mask on. So that, it might protect you from getting it, but it's definitely going to. But it will very very much decrease your chances of spreading it should you have it, not know it. No more freedoms, and well, if God wants these people to get sick, so be it. So right, like there, there are people that have this mentality in certain religions in different parts of the world where they will simply step into a busy intersection or across the street without looking because it's just if it's my time, it's my time. I don't have to take precautions. Right? It's like that joke about the woman that prays to God for years and years and years. God, please let me win the lottery. Bring me out of this poverty. I just need one lotto win, and I'll do it. And she just prays earnestly and earnestly, and finally she gets an answer from God. Karen, you have to buy a ticket first.
Sovereign will ultimately everything that happens. Okay, so there's nothing that I would say I don't know whether or not it's a part of God's. Everything that is happening is with accords to God's permissive will. There's nothing that happens with respect to God's permissive will that God did not ultimately want to happen. There's nothing within that realm.
So God wanted it.
Welcome, Tina. You're listening to my show, but I'm listening to JRobin talk to Roger on Clubhouse, and this is from. How old is this one? I don't know. I don't see the date on it. I think it's a couple weeks old though.
God wanted the 10-year-old to be raped?
With respect to, if you're talking about want with respect to his permissive will, yeah, he allows that to happen. Yeah.
No. I didn't say allows.
Hold on a second.
I said want.
See,
what do you mean by want?
No, but I mean, he wanted it to happen because he thought it was on balance a morally good thing.
No, I didn't say that's not. No, so that's why you're putting. Don't put words in my mouth. I know that's good. It's good that you're asking me.
No.
But just make sure, because you've been kind of slipping certain things in.
I love it when Roger is trying to explain, like, okay, so by this you mean this, then this, right? If you say this, then that entails this. JRobin's like, no, you're putting words in my mouth. No, I'm not. You said this, and it sounds to me like when you say make this kind of statement, it entails that this, right? If you tell people that this murder occurred because it was part of God's plan, and that ultimately everything that happens is good, the connection most people are going to make logically is that what you have just said is that it was good that murder occurred, right? Because it doesn't sound like whatever God's plan is could have happened without your loved one getting murdered. And then you have to wonder, why was that necessary, right? And if a Christian's standing there and attempting to justify this morality is very simply summed up as the ends justify the means. And I don't understand how these guys excuse this. You can easily excuse the ends justifying the means if you are more inclined to think that this God simply is goodness is whatever God does, right? But then you have to accept at that point that from your perspective, from any human's perspective, that goodness is simply arbitrary. It's just it's completely arbitrary at that point. There's no way around it. And from what I can see here, and this is going to get even weirder still, is that what JRobin is talking about, the fact that a person kills another person, that is categorically evil. But the fact that God needed that murder to happen is categorically good in another sense, which means that goodness is now relative. It's relative to means, it's relative to ends. So it's not good in the sense that this person killed another person, because that's a sin, a mortal sin if you're a Catholic, and that should not be happening, right? But it should have happened in the sense that God has an overarching plan, and this murder is somehow integral to that narrative. Relative morality.
This whole conversation that I haven't agreed to, and I had to stop you, right?
Well, okay, so do you think that, I could do this dialectically. Do you think that God wants to actualize a world the totality of which maximizes the amount of morally good things there are?
Not necessarily, because like there are people who reject God, and ultimately, with respect to God's ultimate plan, um, that rejection of God is not a good thing.
Okay.
But like the ultimate justice, that's
Okay, but the ultimate justice that's coming is going to be good, right? So that here, there's a problem, right? If you believe the claims that Christians make, God wants everyone to be saved, when God knows that everyone won't be saved, and when somebody asks, let's say somebody gets to heaven and asks, why did my parents end up here? Oh, they weren't good enough Christians. They didn't really believe. They didn't put their faith in me. Oh, well, but they went to church and they believed that the Holy Spirit was within them, and they repented. They really believed. Well, they really didn't. Well, why didn't you do something to move within them? Like, why wouldn't the Holy Spirit change their hearts for real? Wasn't part of the plan. So you want everyone to be saved, but certain people won't because it's their free will, right? That's when these guys usually like step into the pile of shit that is the libertarian free will part of trying to defend this stuff. Oh, the libertarian free will thing is there. And so I wanted everyone to be saved, but I couldn't save these people because deep down they refused to be saved. But it's okay. Ultimately, that's good because it was part of the plan. It's bad that they rejected me or really didn't repent, but it's good because it gives God the opportunity to visit his justice upon them, which is odd because if the God is also infinitely merciful, the suspension of justice in every case is just as good as the imposition of justice in every case. God can literally have it either way and be good. Just sounds like more relative morality to me.
going to be occurring, right? The justice of those against those people is good, but everything that happens in the God's ultimate with respect to the world that God has created and everything that will happen at the end of it, every event that happens in that world is not morally good, obviously.
Okay, yeah. I feel like there's so much I could unpack there, but I feel like it's going to take me too far.
Look, this whole time.
Yeah, so let's go. Let's go back to the original case. Let's go back to the original. There are a lot. There are a lot of.
So Roger, before you start on that long thing, may I ask you a couple of questions in exchange? Right, I'm going to make a simple argument against the problem of evil, and I'd like you to respond. Would you agree that all moral propositions, whether you're moral realist or not, will entail another consequence, and that consequentialism is never ending? If I look at the outer set of all the predicates of all possible moral outcomes, spanning past your life and the age of the universe, would you agree that that's not known by any one person in point in space and time? Agreed?
I'm going to be totally honest. You sound very echoey, so
sorry about the echoey.
It's a little difficult to understand you completely.
Let me try again. So, if you agree that for all moral propositions starting right now, there'll be an entailment, and that entailment will continue in a chain of moral consequences, and would you agree that as the entire universe runs out, way past your life, that no human being at any point in time can understand the net effect of all moral decisions? Would you agree with that proposition?
That no human being could understand them. Yeah, sure.
Great.
Sure.
So therefore, God's plan is that the final arbiter of what is good and bad is a function that determines what the absolute good is. Any particular snapshot view of that would never be sufficient, and therefore there is no problem of evil.
No, that actually might compound the problem, right? I've heard this one before. The idea being, and this one requires you to anthropomorphize God, I think, to a degree that kind of raises more than just eyebrows. So what he's basically saying here is like, oh, well, if you could understand the consequences of any moral decision, the consequence of that kind of consequentialism just keeps kind of snowballing throughout time, right? And no human being would be able to really understand the net effect of all of this stuff going forward. For all of the existence of the universe, no, probably not. But fortunately for people, we don't have to, right? But that's not the problem, right? What I think this guy goes by curing atheism is bringing up is actually a broader view of the issue that Roger is raising with JRobin, and that okay, so when a Christian lacking the ability to understand the full scope, the universal, timeless scope of all moral decisions ever made and their consequences and those entailments, goes and makes the declaration that a person did something, violated God's will by committing murder, Can that Christian really be confident in that? The only thing that they can be confident in, it would be a theology of divine moral relativism. In this snapshot, a Christian can confidently declare this person's actions to be a violation of God's will. But in the broader scope of things, it may have been a good thing overall for all of these bad things to happen because it's all going to wrap up just fine. What curing atheism seems to be bringing up here is he's just illustrating exactly where Roger's already at with this. Like, yeah, I get that. But the problem with this is the confidence with which Christians can declare something, an action, to be against God's will, but declare the consequences of those bad actions to be due to God's will, and then that both are good. That raises potential problems. You don't have to extrapolate out every entailment and every consequence to the end of time, stretching all the way back to the beginning and all the way to the end, in order to realize there's a real problem here. So this guy is just attempting to like, oh, well, you know, it's anytime you look at a snapshot of it, it's going to be bad. Okay, let's look at a snapshot of it. It's bad that the Germans committed the Holocaust. But 100 years later or whatever, roll forward into the future, 100, 200, 500 years later, the Christian will sit back and like, yeah, it's bad that they did that, but it was part of God's plan, so it's good in that sense. This is just moral relativism, Christian moral relativism. I don't know why they don't embrace it.
Christian has to fall back on the God's omniscience.
Yeah. Right. So no, I know. Yeah. So I'll address this briefly, and then we'll go back to what I was originally trying to raise with JRobin. But with the specific point that you're bringing up, I think that there are like two main issues. Maybe the second issue isn't as powerful as the first, but the first is that I think that this kind of really begins to dangerously tip into territory that we don't want it to. So if we look at events and we say, for instance, like I'll pick something that's easy, right? And we look at the Holocaust. So like, look, this is just morally terrible. And then the skeptical theist is like, well, like, you know, on balance, we can't really know if it was terrible because we don't see the full movie from beginning to end. We only see a snapshot. So making any judgments is like quite difficult. So I think that it sort of robs us of our ability to attribute moral valence to particular actions.
Exactly. So where curing atheism was going was like, okay, well, let me lay this one out for you, Roger. Well, but what about this? What we can? Okay, fine. All right, then someone like JRobin cannot so confidently come out and say it was wrong for someone to do that, right? Can JRobin confidently say that it's wrong for same-sex people to get married when they're doing that? So that's clearly part of God's plan. That's the point, right? This gets to, I mean, there's lots of philosophical implications, but I think practically this gets to the idea of what Christians feel entitled to condemn, right? This makes it harder for them to condemn. It should. The entailment is it should make it harder for them to really judge someone for committing an atrocious act, right? Now, there are libertarian free will tendencies for a lot of fundamentalist Christians, and this does seem to be in the kind of the Protestant vein. Yeah, unless you're, in the Calvinist group. But even Calvinists, I think, screw this up, is the idea that, well, this person chose to do this. They chose to do evil. That is bad. That is a violation of God's will. But God wouldn't have allowed them to make that bad choice if it also wasn't part of his plan. This is the worst of both worlds. You're free to do whatever you want, right? Kind of. But it also sounds like maybe you're not. The choice for you to do evil is part of God's plan, right? Now, some Christians will get around this. They'll try to do like the middle knowledge thing where God's jumping from foot to foot. Like, I think this person might be a murderer. Like, but you know what? There's contingencies in place. Yep, they murdered him, but here we just adjust this and we keep moving, right? God's constantly shifting these pegs, right? He's constantly making these little adjustments here and there, and then making sure that everything works out in the end, right? But a lot of Christians are uncomfortable with that because that doesn't seem like he's omniscient, right? It doesn't sound like a God that knows everything. It just sounds like a God that he's got a lot of capacity, but he doesn't really know the future. So I don't really like the idea of that. No. God knows everything. This is all part of the plan. If it's part of the plan, then God knew what this person was going to do. So the notion of libertarian free will starts to break down. But a lot of Christians really feel they need the idea of libertarian free will, not just mostly I think to justify their condemnation of other people, right? For doing wrong things. Christians usually feel pretty confident telling other people that they're wrong, and they can do so because you did this, the Bible says you shouldn't, therefore you're wrong, right? You shouldn't have done that. Okay, well, but it's part, all I would tell them is like, well, it's part of God's plan, and really, if you think about it, in the grand scheme of things, it couldn't be helped. God needed me to commit these atrocities. It sounds like, oh, no. Don't put words in my mouth. God didn't need, quote unquote, you to do that. Okay, then what else is it? How else would you put it? Well, you could have done only nice things, and that would also have been part of God's plan. Yeah, but it turns out it wasn't. So if you're telling me that what the horrible things that I did were part of God's plan, it kind of sounds like that it was inevitable, right? And if you want to step back away from that, because you don't like what that entails, you just end up retreating into, oh, well, that's not what I mean. It's horseshit. This is the kind of intellectual cowardice that defines, I think, a lot of like modern contemporary Christian, especially in the U.S., contemporary Christian discussions about these kinds of things. This is one of the reasons why I think people just back away from it, right? It really does, because at this point, Roger was right at the very beginning. This lacks any kind of real explanatory power, right? This is just excuse making for an omnipotent being, and it really doesn't make a lot of sense.
Because in the grand scheme of things, we could never know whether or not any particular event is good or bad.
Sorry to interrupt you, not true.
The goodness or the badness of the event
sorry to interrupt you,
must
not
be
true.
weighed in.
Not true. Only moral valence within that window. So let me run with your example. The Holocaust was bad. You condemn the Holocaust, but a positive consequences is the security and the formation of the state of Israel.
Okay, that's really contentious.
So the question again, so you aren't really defeating my argument. All you're doing is sliding your timeline.
No. Okay, no. I don't think that's okay. I don't think that's true. So what you're
Holocaust was bad. You condemn the Holocaust, but a positive consequences is the security and the formation of the state of Israel.
Okay, that's really contentious.
So the question again.
Okay, so God needed the Holocaust to occur in Germany in order for the state of Israel to come to pass. That was this guy's claim. There are a lot of Christians that believe this, I think, of a certain persuasion. But I think they also tend to be the same Christians that believe that the establishment of the Jewish state was necessary in order for it to be destroyed when Jesus comes back. They believe in that, or something like that. I don't know. There's a lot of different end-of-world eschatology notions that I don't remember all their derivations, but that is so what curing atheism is essentially justifying there. The ends justified the means. God needed, for some reason, for the Jewish state, a nation state in modern times, to be reestablished, let's say. And the only way to do that was for a lot of them to be systematically murdered by another nation. Okay. Why? So it's bad that the Germans did that, granted, right? It's good that it happened to them. That's relative morality. Yeah, exactly, Carlton. Exactly. See, this is weird too, because you can hear things from a guy like Curing Atheism with that great big thick, cup of tea British accent, saying something just as weird, just as cross-eye inducing as anything that comes out of D. Roy Cruz. The Gaza Strip is a giant concentration camp. Oh, that's going to get me demonetized. Good morning, Grenade. Bigots using the Bible to justify genocide. Yeah, but in this case, I don't think that's really quite what it is, but it does come across that way, right? Because there are, well, I don't want to get into too much of that, because there's some weird strains of thought from like white supremacists about how this was all supposed to play out, and that's just fucking bizarre. Yeah, this is an interesting point from Josh Rittinger. It just got here, but an elegant way to brush aside all the incoherent nonsense about free will is just to say that for an omnipotent being, there can be no distinction between means and ends. Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think it's also, especially if that omnipotence, which usually is the case, omnipotence for them is part of it being a spaceless, timeless being, right? So yeah, means and ends really doesn't make a lot of sense, and yet you've got somebody like Curing Atheism here saying, well, no, the establishment of the Jewish state required the Nazis to, inflict this horrible atrocity on these people. All right, okay.
So you're already defeating my argument. All you're doing is sliding your timeline.
No. Okay,
What?
no. I don't think that's okay. I don't think that's true. So what you're saying, I'll just respond directly. So I think that, when you say, well, no, the Holocaust was wrong. So you are one of those humans that can't look at the whole story from front to back. So how could you possibly know whether or not, if you really accept what you're saying, how could you possibly know whether or not the Holocaust was on balance a good thing or a bad thing? Because you don't have access to the same knowledge that God does.
Correct.
Yeah.
So all I have to do is a proxy that God knows, and we can't know.
So you're telling me.
Right. So he's confident. That's a good point from Roger. He's confident enough. Curing Atheism can confidently say, well, on balance, it's good because the Holocaust eventually led to consequences A, B, and C, and then the establishment of the Jewish state, which is a good, apparently. But how can he be sure of that? Right? He's still looking at a snapshot. He just started off, and his contribution to this conversation was to say, well, if you're just trying to look at it as a snapshot, that's a limitation of human epistemology. You couldn't possibly weigh all the consequences and the entailments and balance those out relative to eternity, or if not eternity, then just the lifespan of the universe from beginning to end. And yet here he was doing exactly that. Other than, unless he's just trying to, he's trying to say, okay, well, what we can say is we can say that this is a good thing within a snapshot. It's good that this happened because it led to this. But the problem is that he doesn't know that it led to that. How do we know that the formation of a modern Jewish state wouldn't have happened without the Holocaust? Right? That's a hell of an assumption, because that's the flip side of it. And he seems to be saying, well, if it weren't for this, then that wouldn't have happened. How can you possibly know that? Right? And as a way of justifying some kind of atrocity, it's even worse.
You can't know whether or not the Holocaust was bad.
No, I can judge any moral act in its basis as an act, but I can't judge the entire set of all acts.
No. Okay, yeah. So, okay.
Okay, so here's the thing that I think it's happening too. I'm really interrupting this way too much. It's going to take forever. But this seems to be this idea, like, I can judge someone's act based on deontology, right? Deontology would be the deontological morality is going to be this idea that you have to act on a duty, right? Morality is based on what you should and shouldn't do, relative to either commands from God or purposes or whatever. So one has been commanded not to do these kinds of things. So if in a deontological sense, what that person has done is bad because they murdered someone, right? But in a kind of consequentialist kind of, like a divine consequentialism kind of thing, the net effect is that it's good because God's plan is always going to work out, right? But as Josh kind of pointed out, and as I think Roger is sort of kind of getting to, the notion of appealing to consequentialism, if you're dealing with an immaterial, spaceless, timeless, omniscient, omnibenevolent, omnipotent entity, kind of falls apart. The notion of the consequentialism is this God sees everything and all things in real time. So the idea that this needs to happen in order for this to happen, in order for that to happen, like, okay, why would that thing trouble itself with those kinds of things? And for a being that can traffic in miracles, it seems even weirder to try to appeal to this ends being necessary to justify, these certain means are necessary, right? In order to justify the ends, the plan of God. That seems really odd. Well, within the space, within the confines of our world, these are the things that need to happen in the nitty gritty, hideously compromised reality that we're in. Really? Okay. Then what were miracles about? Miracles were just a song and dance, a little tap dance show to convince people that Jesus was possibly divine. But after that, the miracles get shut off because what God only has so many spells he can cast. It's all
Okay, again, what I'm trying to say
staggering.
is like ceteris paribus. If we look at the Holocaust,
What is ceteris paribus? Roger. Okay, this is very simple. It's not complicated. Okay, very simple. We can talk in plain English here. We can talk in normal English. Okay, you're smart. I get it. Congratulations. Okay, now look, the very simple.
Catch that? Did you catch that snark? Jesus.
Okay, this is very simple. It's not complicated. Okay, very simple. We can talk in plain English here. We can talk in normal English. Okay, you're smart. I get it. Congratulations. Okay, now look.
Wow. Wow. The sass on this guy. Like, that sounds like somebody implicitly conceding that, you know, that he might be a little outmatched here. But he's certainly, but since he's a fucking terrible sport, he's not going to do this with any grace or wit or charm or charisma. He's just going to be a fucking brat about it. What a little fucking twit this guy is. Congratulations, you're smart. We can talk in real language here. First of all, he was talking to a guy that was already starting to throw out some philosophical terms that were probably not ones that JRobin's comfortable with. So this guy, Curing Atheism, starts throwing this stuff out. Roger thinks that this guy's probably capable of understanding a little bit of jargon, throws out a term. JRobin objects to it, right? And JRobin is not white knighting for Curing Atheism at this point. JRobin is just coming in there and trying to appeal to, let's talk in common sense English. Okay, if we're talking about theology, common sense goes out the fucking window, especially if you're talking about spaceless, timeless entities that are ultimate in the foundations of all reality and provide for possibility and impossibility. That's not common sense language. Sorry, JRobin. You don't get to the like. Let's just talk brass tacks here. I just want to. I want to keep this simple. Let's keep this conversation earthy, and keep it grounded. Right. Keep it simple. Explain it to me like I'm 5. Right.
Look, the very simple position here is not, and I haven't seen a contradiction. I haven't seen a problem this whole time. Exactly what Curing said. Exactly what I've been saying this whole time. The action can be judged as morally good or morally bad with respect to whether or not it's in accordance with what God has prescriptively decreed should or should not happen with respect to prescriptive
right,
will, okay?
right.
When we say that something is when you say that something is good or bad in another sense, when it comes to God's sovereign decrees or his overall permissive will, then everything that happens, if you're saying it's in accordance with that, is good, because
Okay,
if
maybe this is a better
good,
question.
you mean it's in accordance with that.
Okay,
Then
in what
everything that
sense?
happens
Okay,
will be
this is
good.
a better question. In what sense was the Holocaust good?
Insofar as it contributed to God's overall plan. That's what goodness
Okay,
is.
right. So I think that's QED. I don't think I have anything further to say
What is
about that.
QED? What do you say?
QED is what you say at the end of a mathematical proof.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Anyway, QED. I think that if that's what your view entails, then it's absurd. Okay.
What's absurd about it? What's absurd about it?
If you think that the Holocaust was good because God commanded it to be good, or that God willed it to be good.
I didn't say that either.
Okay, well then what could you possibly mean? I mean, like
I already explained it
God,
to you.
God. Well, no. So it's a part of God's permissive will in the sense that God permitted it to happen.
Yeah, the only thing good mean, so don't divorce good from any other conception of good that you may have, other than the one I'm about to tell you. If by good you just
Forget everything that you know about good and accept the definition, the crazy ass definition that I'm going to give you, and only the crazy ass definition I'm going to give you. Excellent work, JRobin. Excellent. Space for QED. It has been demonstrated. Mic drop. Yeah. I'm sure JRobin has probably heard that before, but you know, that I really feel like those are moments where he can try to go after somebody for being smart sounding and not smart enough. Darth does the same thing too, right? You're a PhD, aren't you? Oh, well, you need me to change your diaper? You need me to get you a napkin for that drool? You know, that kind of shit. Is JRobin a Calvinist? I don't think so. No, I mean, I don't think that he would hold up with actual Calvinists, because an actual Calvinist who probably held to Calvinist notions of grace would not be Well, it's hard to say. Calvinists are such a it's just a insane bag of cats. My understanding of their theology, it seems to me to entail that if you really kind of internalize it, there's kind of two different versions of Calvinists. Calvinists make a joke about this, the cage stage Calvinist, right? Where a person gets into Calvinism, some kind of Reformed theology, up to the point where they start going nuts and they just start condemning everyone, especially other Christians, right? And they call them cage stage because they're basically feral, like they're just on attack mode all the time, and you got to lock them away in a cage. Again, this is not a term that atheists invented. This is a term that Calvinists invented to describe some of their own, in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way, right? The idea is that once they get a little bit more of that theology, once they start to really kind of become more aware of the rest of the entailments of their theology, in especially to the extent of how it applies to grace, it starts to change the way, or at least they believe it should change the way they approach people that they disagree with, or especially when they approach people like the reprobate, right? The reprobate is the person destined to hell in Calvinist theology, right? Reprobate is not just another word for sinner. Reprobate is like an inveterate sinner, like they're guaranteed, stamped, approved, boarding first on the flight to hell. Those people should be pitied, right? So if you really internalize it and you really get it worked into your brain, the emotional reaction to people who are non-believers or are of the wrong mindset or convinced of these kinds of things is probably should be pity, and hopefully not of a condescending kind, but it does come out, but it's more pity, not rage, right? The kind of cage stage Calvinists, right, are flipping out because somebody's getting. It's the same thing as the syndrome. Someone's wrong on the internet, and they have to be. You have to like convince them that they're wrong. You have to. You will be right. Um, that's sort of the case that like they've been armed with the truth and they have to get out and basically correct everyone, right? And that's not how grace works. And if you get a little older and a little bit wiser in Reformed theology, you get to the point where you realize there's only so much you can say that's going to work on people. Up to a point, it's going to require the transformative grace that is brought by the influence of the Holy Spirit. That's part of their theology. A lot of Calvinists don't fucking get that part, or at least they don't understand that is heavily entailed by a lot of their notions of grace. And so I have heard Calvinists on here, on social media, go after people like Darth for reacting to non-believers and Christians of other theologies and other denominations and getting pissed off at them and raging out and accusing them of being liars and doing all that kind of, crazy high blood pressure antics kind of bullshit when it's not warranted. He's motivated by something that probably is not consistent with someone who has an understanding of that philosophy. That being said, though, people like this, it's hard to determine a cage stage Calvinist from somebody like JRobin and Darth Dawkins. But I hold that JRobin and Darth Dawkins are the kind of Christians that are Calvinist enough to believe in the deterministic inevitability of the super powerful God that makes sure that everything that happens is part of his plan, but also hang on to enough Arminianism and the idea of libertarian free will in order to justify their condemnations of other people choosing poorly. So they get to believe in both. Their God is inevitable and can't be stopped. Thanks, Calvin. You have to pick good things or you will pick good things and you will pick bad things. And if you pick bad things, I am coming after you to remind you that God will get you. Thanks, Arminius. Worst of both. So, is JRobin a Calvinist? Sure. Aren't we all Calvinists in a way? Your mic went deeper into the bucket. Am I not coming through clear? It just went a little weird. I wonder what it's doing. Hang on. Oh, weird. Yeah, it's like the gain changed. All right. It might be this thing's connected with Bluetooth, and that's not something that I trust. So Yeah, it does sound hollow. All right, let me play this and see if it straightens out. If it doesn't, I might be able to make some adjustments.
You simply mean it's in accordance with God's prescriptive will or permissive will. Sorry, and everything that happens is just good. By good, you just mean everything that is happening and everything that will happen. If that's how you're defining the word good, then everything is good. Okay. Now, we may have a different conception of good in many other circumstances, but that's the only way in which good is meant when we're talking about God's permissive will. We're not saying that anything is in accords with God's prescriptive will in that kind of
Okay.
sense. That's not what good means in the sense I've just used it.
So good is relative. That's what I got from that. I don't know if anybody else picked that up, but it sounds like, because JRobin had just told him, forget what you think you know about good and listen to what I'm telling you what good is. There's two different meanings for the word good. Good in this sense and good in that sense. So good is relative.
Okay, so there are things to come in here, and I think that like the broader point that I sort of just want to make, and then I really want to return to the original argument, because this is probably a sidetrack that I even brought up this objection, is to say that I think that the problem of evil becomes an issue again the second you invoke divine psychology. And Kevin Sharp has made this point in his debate with Craig, but the moment you invoke knowing what God would do or what God wouldn't do or what he thinks or what he doesn't think, then I think that the non-believer is totally justified in bringing in the problem of evil.
Yeah, I think Roger's right there. I wanted to address this here really quick. Let's see. Last night, Warren asked God isn't real because, and I said because he's an obvious character from fiction, and then he said I was dodging. LOL. So I timed his ass out for being dishonest. Yeah, I do want to say I don't think Warren really necessarily deserved being timed out for that. I really don't think I don't know that he's being dishonest, even though that question seems dishonest. I think he actually thinks there's something going on there. When JRobin thinks of this too. If you answer the question like you, because, and there is a point to be made here. If he asks you why isn't God real, and you say because he was made up, that is the same thing as saying because God's not real, right? So you're just sort of answering the question with the question itself. You would have to give him a reason. Why don't you think he's real, right? And that actually would get into, well, because the God that you're defining, right, either has incoherent or contradictory properties, or most gods. This is actually something that comes up later on. I'll probably get into this with the Darth Dawkins one later, where he's bitching and complaining about somebody being able to justify why they're a local atheist, but can't justify global atheism, right? But generally, the skepticism about why don't we think these gods are real? Why don't we think it's actually the case that these things exist? And one of the things that all of these gods have in common is that that we think that they're stories. We think they're not real because they're predicated on appeals to supernaturalism. They're literally coming from people are telling a story about a being that cannot be verified in any real way in order to explain the inexplicable, the otherwise inexplicable, right? Or the heretofore inexplicable. When we get explanations for what was inexplicable, then all of a sudden that God really isn't relevant to that, right? But we just continue to shift what God is an explanation for, and he's always there, or they are always there to explain something we don't have a better explanation for, especially in terms of like how, what, when, Now the why of things, that's always a little bit mysterious, and that's something that a lot of these Christians can do. So in that case, Dean, I'm not trying to like get on your case or anything about that. And if you think Warren is badgering people or getting obnoxious with it, I don't always see everything on the live chat, so you have the discretion to mute that. But in that particular case, I don't think he was being dishonest. I really don't think he understands why that particular question worded that way is so crazy making, right? Why don't you think God's real, right? The reason that you wouldn't think that he was real, right? You can give that reason, right? Because the God that Warren is tending to believe in really isn't different from any other supernatural being that's ever been posited by somebody, and is indistinguishable from other fictional characters, right? In fact, actually, the only distinguishing feature of those gods is that other fictional characters are used just to tell a story, right? Not to attempt to explain the origins of the rain, for instance, or something like that. And that I think, and because of those commitments that they're making, those stories are even harder to believe, right? There's got to be there probably should be a little bit more. They should be more forthcoming with some kind of either evidence for that, or at the very least, if they've got a narrative, the narrative had better be consistent, right? But if you see narrative inconsistencies, you see blatant incoherencies, you see incomprehensible assertions or incomprehensible features like ultimacy in big quotes, all caps, the kind of ultimacy that would preclude the possibility of empirical evidence ever proving. Those are all red flags that someone is asserting a story in place of an actual explanation. And I think that's a pretty good explanation for why we think God isn't real. But that's it. Odin has more evidence than Yahweh. He said he would kill the ice giants. Do you see any ice giants? Yeah, but isn't that the same thing as saying, like, ever since I bought this new laptop, no tigers have walked past my window. So this laptop repels tigers. They call that specious reasoning, but yeah. But anyway, no, I take your point. You know, and didn't Odin hang from a tree, same as Jesus, but for 9 days instead of, like an afternoon? Just saying. How are you already up and streaming for an hour? Damn. Yeah. Hi, Maya. How you doing? Sleep was thrown off. I had a medical procedure yesterday, and the guy loaded up first thing in the morning with quite a bit of Valium in order to get my claustrophobic ass into imaging. Right. I do not do well with tight spaces. So yeah, I was kind of in like a weird coma because I still had a work day to get through. Was a little bit out of it. Fell asleep way early, and now I'm up, and I've got a little bit of caffeine in me, and I'm a threat to everything and everyone. I apologize.
But if you maintain,
I haven't heard a single concept this whole time. How long has this been up? It's been up for over 30 minutes, almost coming up to an hour. It's been up for 40 minutes, and I haven't heard a single contradiction. You keep telling me the problem of evil, and I've explained to you that there is no contradiction. You haven't presented the P and not P, and you keep circling back around to it.
Right? No. Okay.
So like, what am I supposed to think, Roger? What am I supposed to think right now?
Okay. Yeah. All right.
An important question from JRobin. What am I supposed to think right now? That's something that you probably ought to take up with your therapist, JRobin.
So this is the idea. First of all, in philosophy, it's not like every argument results in some kind of contradiction at the conclusion, and therefore
I don't have a problem.
That's not how it works.
I'm still a
That's
look.
not how
at the
it
end
works.
of the day,
I'm bringing up attention.
Roger, at the end of the day, I'm a Christian. I don't see any tension. Right? You're talking to me, right? You're talking to me and potentially to the other Christians in the room.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
see
not
any
an
tension.
argument.
I don't have a problem.
I don't see a tension. That's a psychological factor.
Roger, you haven't explained the tension. I've actually explained my position to you clearly. I've explained where you were faulty in either your mischaracterizations of me, my position.
He hasn't really explained how he's getting anything wrong. JRobin just keeps going back to this explanation, to his insistence that goodness is relative. I haven't really heard him actually really address the conflicts that JRobin's bringing up, or that Roger's bringing up, other than to just go back and say, well, no, when we talk about good in this sense, it's good. We talk about good in that sense, it's good, right? But when somebody like Roger's like, okay, well, that entails then that, there's an entailment built into that, if you kind of hold both to be good, that it's a good thing that the Holocaust happened, and JRobin objected to that. Like, don't put words into my mouth. Although I don't think he used it in that exact case, but that seems to be his issue. No, don't go saying that thing was fine. It wasn't fine that murderer took a life, but the fact that God permitted it to happen was perfectly good. Like, that's the tension. That's the weird part there, right? Because you're appealing to two different things. That person is bad, right? And that's where that morality is subjective and relative, right? The fact that, like, I get this from a theological perspective. God is not culpable in another person, right? From a Christian perspective, the fact that there's a murderer out there that kills someone, God is not responsible for that person's action, right? And that is not what I think Roger's doing, right? The issue, that's not part of the issue that he's bringing up, and I think that's what JRobin and others believe. Guys like Roger and other atheists and skeptics bring up. we're trying to blame God and hold God personally culpable and responsible for the actions of a human doing something terrible. But that's not the tension. The tension is in saying something what you believe in an objective good, right? It's bad that a person killed somebody, but it's good for God that that murder happened. That's where things get tricky. It's part of God's plan, so therefore it's fine, it's good. When you word it that way, though, JRobin obviously knows that sounds terrible. Don't go doing that. Don't put words in my mouth. But that's the entailment. It's too bad that it sounds bad. You don't have to make the mistake of saying God is personally responsible for that person's personal choice to murder someone. That's not the issue. The issue is when the Christian tries to turn around and say, hey, you murderer, God didn't want you to kill that person. You committed a sin that was naughty. And then tell the survivors, the loved ones of that victim, that, oh, why did God allow that to happen? Part of his plan. It's all going to work out for the greater good. It's part of the greater good. There's almost no way that a Christian, when approaching that second scenario, can do so without employing language that sounds like they're just being an apologist for something terrible.
Where you may have misunderstood what I hold to be true with respect to the problem of evil, who God has revealed. Okay, so I don't see a problem. You haven't made that clear. So the only problem here is with you and your how you're purveying the problem here.
The problem is, I don't really think it's about the way that Roger's conveying it. I think JRobin wants to make this personal. Aaron Reese, he'd make a really great shitty sitcom character. You ate from the tree? Oh, you guys. I'd watch that shit, Aaron. I would watch that. So. Let me see here. There was something. Yeah, right here. If they assert that God is maximally ultimate and they will agree that the universe is the container for all things that can have or will exist, you can make a syllogism saying God doesn't exist. Yeah, I think that's actually similar to somebody that I know who basically kind of argues from the existence angle. If you're going to make the claim that God exists, God requires a location to exist. Existence requires a essentially space and time. And when you turn around and say that the space and time isn't part of God's existence, it starts to sound like special pleading unless you got a good argument for why that's not the case for him. I want to point this out, Warren. The fact that you are making any assertions or claims at all with intelligibility is proof that the Christian God exists. And sorry, it can't be proof that the Christian God exists, Warren. That's not proof. Now, you might think that it's evidence, but even that evidence is not sufficient to prove the God that is defined by Darth Dawkins and JRobin and others. If you're talking about a God that is ultimate, right, then that God cannot be empirically verified, not to an extent where he can be proven in any real way. You only have evidence for something that is powerful. And all the evidence, no matter how much evidence you get, simply points to an increasingly powerful being. But you would never get the evidence necessary to demonstrate that it was ultimate in any sense. The only way you could know that is if you yourself were ultimate. So intelligibility is not proof of a Christian God. It just can't be. Right. That's just an assertion in an attempt to try to say, like, well, something is required for intelligibility. Why can't it be God? But that's just basically putting God in a position of a brute fact. Somebody could just say, the universe is necessary for intelligibility. The universe is the brute fact that we have to accept. And now you're at loggerheads, right? Your brute fact is the Christian God. My brute fact is the universe. Where do we go from there? Nowhere.
You haven't done so successfully.
Okay, no, the way in which
unsuccessful.
No, I mean, again, I think I've made it as clear as I can.
Okay, so let's do this without any of the special fancy jargon, without any of the
Sure. Okay, this is what I'm trying to say. So I'll set up the dialectic from the beginning.
that uses the word dialectic. Yeah, that's going to make that vein bulge a little bit more in JRobin's head. Roger hasn't been that jargon filled in this discussion for that much. I think he started getting a little bit more jargony when he was talking to Curing Atheism, which JRobin then, got frustrated with and tried to stomped on him. Right. What I thought was weird is that initial question that kind of like came galloping out of Curing Atheism was not something that was clear, concise, or easily intuited by just your average listener. JRobin let it go, right? But JRobin must smash Roger when Roger's talking all smart brain on him, right? Don't you try to get away from me, smarty pants. I'll put you in your place. Remember, you're the atheist here.
Basically, originally you said God revealed to me that we don't have the innate authority. So you clarified that God gave us the authority to take life. And then I responded with a very common objection in the literature, which is like, if you really think that, then self-defense becomes very difficult to explain, and so do other things. And then what you said was, well, no, well, okay, hang on, I'm summarizing my point. Then you said, well, actually, no, because God revealed to me that in these special circumstances I can do this. And then what I said in response was, first of all, I'm not sure this argument from Revelation is really going to be as powerful as we think it is, because there are Christians that are as Christian as you are, that are as knowledgeable about the Bible as you are, but that have revelations in the opposite direction. And so the question is like, how do we adjudicate on matters like that? Because it seems as though there are passages that each of us could pull up that would point in both directions. And I don't think that we're going to settle the matter in that way. And so then on a further point, I say, look, I'm not even sure appealing to like God's plan in this kind of way, or like what divine psychology, what God thinks or what God feels is an advisable strategy. Because if you do that, then you kind of have to give up this morally sufficient reason repulsion of the problem of evil, which actually may be quite successful, right? It may work. It might actually resolve the problem of evil, and it might be a very good argument for theists. I mean, a lot of atheists are sort of conceding that now. But I think that if you start to invoke divine psychology, it becomes just very murky, and it becomes unclear why the atheist can't do so as well. And so I don't think that's a good strategy for responding to the type of argument that I was bringing originally, which was about threshold Christianity and the permissibility of abortion accordingly. So, yeah.
Okay, so the ultimate problem here is
So apparently this conversation went back quite a ways because they were talking about the permissibility of abortion. So I think they had been talking, or this conversation had been going on for quite a while before they got into this, and this is just a snippet between JRobin and Roger and Curing Atheism that got clipped. So yeah, but it was bound to do that because if an atheist or even like a liberal Christian steps in and starts making an argument for why something like abortion should either be accepted at a secular level or maybe even make a religious argument for the permissibility of abortion, somebody like JRobin is going to try to get into this area where they just impugn either the motives of the individual making that argument or even positing the hypothetical possibility of an argument, or then try to like tackle whether or not that person has the capacity to ground intelligibility or something like that, if that's even as if that's even relevant, right? Or this is why I think to get into a little bit of a political rant, not too long, I think like to the extent that we're seeing like an increase in sort of the outspokenness of the Christian nationalists and kind of the Christian right in this country, especially on culture war issues, this is why they don't really jive well in a country that is, unfortunately for them, pluralistic, right? There's lots of different faith traditions represented in the United States, and that's the notion of secular, right? They will use secular and atheist interchangeably because they like muddying the waters. Secular, for the purposes of like the government, is the idea that the government's not going to be as involved in establishing religion, or it's going to try to make decisions independent of religion as much as it can, to take into account that it needs to establish a rule of law that can be relatively uniformly applied to all citizens regardless of their faith traditions. rather than trying to apply a once, like, no, we're grounded. The founding fathers were Christian. This is a Christian nation, and so them's the breaks. The Christianity is the way things are going to work. Don't likes it, gets out. That kind of thing. That's that I think is just, that's an insane way to do that, because let's say that everybody got what they wanted in this case, then it's just going to be every Christian disagreeing with every other Christian about how they're going to actually enforce things, right? And that's important, especially if you're talking about these issues. If the impulse in these channels is for the Christian, like if somebody brings up a position or an opinion about how a government should function or what the laws should be, what should and should not be legal or illegal, and the Christians, these kinds of Christians, these kinds of online Christian soldiers, their reaction is to just challenge your ability to, well, because you can't ground intelligibility, or you don't affirm the existence of an ultimate being, I can commit the genetic fallacy. I'm justified in a genetic fallacy, and I just don't have to concede to anything that you say, right? It doesn't seem to me like it would take very long for somebody like JRobin to just accept the fact that those people shouldn't be accepted as citizens. And then it wouldn't really be much further to go, well, maybe it's entailed that people that are bad behave that way really aren't people, right? Until you can convert them. So I'm not exactly sure why JRobin is not like for the ideas of like forced labor camps in order to force people to convert to Christianity. I mean, I wonder if JRobin has seen The Handmaid's Tale, and I wonder if he roots for the wrong side. Just saying.
Invoking what you call divine psychology in God's plan. Is that the ultimate problem here?
Sorry, someone called me. What?
So are we boiling this down to your problem here is the problem of Christians invoking God's plan? Is that the problem?
Yeah, I think that it's not just invoking God's plan. It's invoking God's plan, and then in other areas, sort of tossing up your hands and being like, well, we can never know God's plan. But in these special circumstances, we do. But not when it comes to the Holocaust, we don't know. When it comes to this, we don't know. But when it comes to whether or not I can like drop bombs on the Middle East, yeah, like we have a very clear picture of what's out there. Like that just to me seems like a little bit inconsistent.
Okay, so now you're equivocating.
Oh, not JRobin is going to accuse him of equivocating. Okay, I'm going to put a pin in that a little bit. I think this is a good point from Roger, because this is something that I don't think that that JRobin is not effectively dealing with, right? Because this is the notion coming from people like JRobin. They want to engage in political conversations, especially when it comes to pro-life, pro-choice kinds of things, and so they can definitively claim, and many do, that not only does God not want abortion for anyone, right? Abortion is definitively wrong. It's equivalent to murder. No one should do it. But the fact that abortion has been going on probably since people have had the capacity to interrupt a pregnancy, when with whatever means they've been able to find, before medical procedures. I mean, the ingestion of certain herbs and foods can induce can trigger a miscarriage, but it's different. So they're making the claim that it's definitively wrong. It's definitely bad that it's doing it. The fact that people have been doing it, you would have to say, was God's will. But for a lot of these Christian nationalists, the reason that it has to be removed, the reason it has to be stopped, is because God will not bless this country if we continue to behave as a nation in this sinful way, right? So as a Christian, now I don't know if JRobin is one of these, like when we behave this way, God withdraws his protecting hand. A lot of Pentecostals and evangelicals talk like that. I don't know if JRobin's ever said that or not, right? But many believe that. So they can make these kinds of they can be very, very confident in making the claim. One, you should not do that because it's definitely wrong in all circumstances. The fact that it's happening is wrong in all circumstances. And three, the fact that the country is doing that, the country needs to stop. The country needs to make a law that declares this to be illegal. Otherwise, we don't get certain blessings from God. We're very, very certain about these points, right? Maybe not all of them, but most of them, right? Because some groups are only going to be really convinced about the first two. Okay. But if somebody was mourning the loss of all of these unborn babies, all of these terminated pregnancies, and cried out, why did God allow for these these pregnancies to be terminated? Why did he allow that? What's the Christian answer? It was part of his plan. We absolutely have to make it illegal. It's an absolute catastrophe that it's going on. It must be illegal if we're going to be a country that has a moral high ground that we want to declare to be, right with God. We must outlaw it in all cases. A federal ban in any circumstances. But the fact that it was considered a constitutional right up until recently, and all of these pregnancies were terminated, right? And somebody could get extremely anxious and almost panic stricken at the number of unborn pregnancies that were terminated, that were aborted. Why did God allow that? Well, in the balance of things, it was all for the best. How can you hold that? Is cognitive dissonance right there. How can you hold those two ideas in your head? That makes no sense. Mythic Rosas, it's always interesting to observe the way that Roger and JRobin act. You can tell from the way that Roger talks that he wants a conversation, but the way that JRobin talks is all about winning. Yeah. Yep. Hello, Alpha K91. Good to see you. Yes, I'm back. Doing an early morning one. Joe Rocker, numbers 5 equals abortion. Not exactly. A lot of people talk about that. A lot of people are kind of flippant about it. I don't mind the fact that a lot of people are kind of like, because they're like, well, you can have an abortion in numbers 5. So the bitter waters test, right, for the woman, drink the potion. If she happens to be pregnant, her belly will swell and she will slough her thigh, quote unquote. She will miscarry. It's definitely entailed in that story. It's a touchy one. I think if you read the Midrash and the Mishnah, even though they're really, really dodgy about it, in Jewish tradition, they're just like, yeah, that's a weird story. It was inserted in there. Not exactly sure if that ever really happened. I think the understanding of that within kind of like rabbinic circles right now is that, yeah, the notion that a miscarriage is happening in the case of an unfaithful coupling is allowed, right? Because that's God deciding it. But that whole thing is an extremely touchy thing. I think what most Christians will end up appealing to is like, in the case that a woman is given a potion and then God's will acts on her body to cause her to miscarry, that's fine. Miscarriages happen all the time. That is simply the will of God. So on balance, I guess those terminated pregnancies are good. But when you terminate a pregnancy, when it is done by an act of man, a medical procedure, medicine, or something like that, that must be categorically bad, right? You just have to allow things to happen, right? That is accurate. The Bible is 100% okay with killing babies. Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, the flood and adulterous women. Agreed. Let me see here. An abortion is just killing a fetus body and not a fetus soul. A fetus soul will just find another fetus body when the time is right. That's an interesting idea. I can't remember where I thought I saw I read a comic a long time ago, like some graphic novel where they did that. But that is kind of an odd thing, right? Because the destruction of a human body and the idea that a soul is immortal does come up, and people wonder, like, well, what is the destination of the soul of a baby that is terminated? Especially if you believe that life begins at conception. My understanding is Christians believe that life is essentially the genesis of a soul, a new one, right? It's the emergence of a new soul into the world. Unless they're these people that believe all people just exist eternally, right? And then in that case, it's like, okay, your soul's banging around in some kind of ether somewhere, and then a fetus pops up, shows up online. It's your time in the queue. You get inserted into that, and then error 404, terminated, and then you get bounced back out, back to the back of the queue. It's your time to wait again. I mean, the question of the ages, the deepest mystery, is that which puzzles, confounds, and maddens is way too early to listen to JRobin justify Lamentations and coffee. Sorry, Jody. Yeah, if this is if the combination of this, the early hour, and caffeine are getting to you, I suggest just shutting me off. I'm not saying anything that important. Okay, so that's kind of where things are going now. And now, so Roger has laid out this idea that he thinks that there is this problem when you're trying to kind of appeal to God's psychology, and now JRobin has accused him of equivocating. Let's see what that equivocation is.
It seems like you get backed into a corner because you have to say in some feasible way, like the Holocaust was good. Like there's an interpretation of the Holocaust, whether it's permissive or prescriptive or whatever, where you have to say it's good. And
Okay,
I think
what do you mean by good? What do you mean by good, Roger? Roger, what do you mean by good?
That it, at least in your case, that it maximizes perhaps it satisfies God's preferences.
I didn't say preferences. I said everything that satisfies God's ultimate sovereign.
Hang on a second. I'm going to wind that back just a couple seconds. How did he ask him that?
Comes to whether or not I can like drop bombs on the Middle East. Yeah, like we have a very clear picture of what's allowed there. Like that just to me seems like a little bit inconsistent.
Okay, so now you're equivocating.
It seems like you get backed into a corner because you have to say in some feasible way, like the Holocaust was good. Like there's an interpretation of the Holocaust, whether it's permissive or prescriptive or whatever, where you have to say it's good. And
Okay,
I think
what do you mean by good? What do you mean by good, Roger? Roger, what do you mean by good?
That it, at least in your case, that it maximizes perhaps it satisfies God's preferences.
I didn't say preferences. I said everything that satisfies God's ultimate sovereign decree as a sovereign creator. Everything that
Semantics, right?
that happens in the world would be a part of God's permissive
Right.
will.
So
okay,
right.
so if by good, okay, if it is a case that by good you are referring to the satisfaction of God's permissive will, then everything that happens is good. Okay? If that is what you mean by good, if that's what you mean by good, but you can mean something else by good, in which case I may or may not agree that everything that happens is good. If you mean something else by good, right?
Okay. No. Yeah. I mean.
But so if you want to talk about the Holocaust, if you want to talk about dropping bombs in the Middle East, if you want to talk about giving money to charity, if you want to talk about us talking to each other right now, if you want to talk about me walking down the street to buy something from the store, everything, if you mean by good that is in the satisfaction of God's permissive will, everything is good in that scope. Okay.
So that means good is relative then. I really don't know how JRobin is going to escape this. Like these guys believe in relative morality. It's good in the scope that it's part of God's plan, but it might be bad in the sense that what you did was a violation of what God told you is good and bad. You did a bad thing, but because it happened, it's part of God's plan. That in that sense, it's good. Like I find it fascinating that JRobin keeps insisting on this. Roger understands this part, right? And this is the part that Roger's wrestling with. That JRobin is just trotting out this kind of relativistic goodness, and with no real trouble, right? Like no, like he's just like just hand waving any of the objections that Roger's bringing up. Like, look, you guys are dead certain that this stuff is like you can make these kinds of accusations and claims about what is and is not definitively good and bad. But when you try to say that it's bad in this sense that someone killed someone, it's good that it happened. In fact, I would say it's even great, right? Because God is great. It's great that it happened because it's all part of God's plan, right? It needed it to be that way, right? But that part right there, it needed to occur. Did it need to occur? Could God have achieved his ends by different means? And I think that might actually come up here in a little bit.
So you're thankful for the Holocaust happening then?
I didn't say that. I didn't say so. So again, you're not, again with putting words in my mouth. Again,
no, but like, why wouldn't you be?
Right. Why wouldn't he be?
Because it's good.
Why are you putting? Why are you putting?
Why would I be? Well, why would you be? Because you just said it was good. It's good that God's plan is coming into act. Isn't that something that we should praise? Isn't God praiseworthy? Isn't his plan by extension praiseworthy? If his plan is being carried out, isn't all of it worthy of praise? That I think is actually getting closer to where I think a more common language sense that Roger's been bringing up, right? If you want to condemn it in the sense that a person did something, okay, but then you can't condemn it in the sense that God needed that to happen, or God couldn't have needed it to happen, right? God doesn't need anything, right? But that was part of God's plan, so it's good that it happened. That's praiseworthy. If it's not praiseworthy, then why wouldn't it be praiseworthy? It should be by definition. God is praiseworthy. His plan is praiseworthy. Therefore, those bad actions are praiseworthy. If they can come up with an argument that somehow like makes it so like this, it's really strange to hear JRobin like, no, it's not. That's not what I said. That's what's entailed from what you said, and he doesn't want anything to do with it.
Words in my mouth.
That's part of God's sovereign decree, and everything that's part of God's sovereign decree, why wouldn't it be good?
Good in what sense? Why would you
In the
just saying
sense that
typologies? You're just saying why wouldn't something in God's sovereign decree be in God's sovereign decree? That's all you're saying right now.
Okay, well, if your definition of what's good is circular, that seems to be your problem, not
No,
my
it's not.
problem.
Good is just a token to
Describe a type.
To describe a concept, right?
So good is just a token to describe a concept, and apparently in JRobin's case, it's a relative concept. Doubting Thomas, if these people are so pro-life, how much are they really doing to stop starvation of the living? Shouldn't they be taking be taking of those lives that are perishing with at least as much fervor as the on board? Yeah, you would think so. Michael Deaton, this illustration is insane. How badass would it be to see Yahweh's hand just extend from a hole in the sky, punch through the ceiling of an abortion clinic, and grab the baby and shove it back in at the last second? I said no abortions, y'all. That's disturbing. I expect to see that in a TV show at some point in the future. If Christianity is true, either fetuses go to heaven or they deserve to go to hell. In either case, it's obligatory to maximize abortions. Yeah, I think you'd need something else in there, but that's potentially a really difficult argument to get around. And I've heard people take it that way. So yeah, and this is so in a sense, evil doesn't exist. Yeah, it's weird, right? Because if anything evil that occurs is part of God's plan, then this is something that like guys like Jack Angstreich and Darth Arianis and some of these other guys in Clubhouse bring up in their discussions. They're like, so if we're talking about good as in what should happen and evil is what should not happen, then in this sense, everything that happens should have happened because everything is part of God's plan. So you can't say something like a murder is bad in the sense that it shouldn't have happened, because it should have happened. The Christian is insisting that it should have happened. It needed to happen. It had to have happened, right? Right, because if it shouldn't have happened, then it wouldn't have happened, right? This is where a lot of Christians get kind of confused by this, right? Unless you're one of these Christians that kind of holds to this middle knowledge stuff, where people really do have libertarian free will, and God can't predict exactly what we're going to do, right? He can probabilistically understand what we're likely to do, but he doesn't totally know what's going to happen yet, right? But a lot of Christians, especially these guys, don't like that because it makes God subject to temporality, right? He's sort of riding the plank like the rest of us. He's on the timeline, watching things happening, waiting for consequences to unfold. And they don't like that though. No, that can't be God. God's ultimate. God's above that. He transcends that. Well, okay. So if that's the case, then he's already seen everything that everyone does. Everything that everyone does, he can't fail. So everything that happens is a result of his will, and everything that happens is a result of his plan. Therefore, everything that does happen should happen. It should have happened. So it is by definition good in that sense of good, right? But in the sense of you shouldn't have done that thing because God told us, God gave us a commands as individuals not to kill. So in that sense, it's bad. From an individual command to you, don't do these things, and you violated it. But it's good that you violated it because I needed it to happen. This is just bonkers. It's a basic contradiction. You don't have the same. You could hold to this, but you have to have a relativistic comprehension of good and evil at this point, because these are two different senses of good. But JRobin doesn't want to commit to that either, because that makes good relative. And by the way, hello to Doubting Thomas. Thanks for joining. And Alex, good to see you here. And Repo Sandman, good to see you.
So you're basically
something is fulfilling. Okay. No, because
okay,
when you use
I know how to do this.
When you use the word good, right, and when I use the word good, I can talk about many different things, right? The word good can refer to whether or not something is contributing to God's permissive will. It can refer to whether or not something is consistent with God's prescriptive will. It can refer to something else, depending on the context. Okay, so if you're going to say something is good, right? My position is, when I say word something is good, and in certain senses, I may be saying that something is fulfilling God's ultimate plan, or I may be saying that it's consistent with God's prescriptive will.
Which
It
one?
depends on the
And then
context.
okay, and then in the context of the Holocaust, which one was it again?
There are two different. In the case of the Holocaust, it's two different definition, or not two different definitions, but it's two different values. So in one case, it wouldn't be good in the sense that it's out of accord with God's prescriptive will, but it would be good in God's permissive will sense.
Right, but that just the permissive will thing just gets you to a concept of the ends being justified by the means kind of thing. That's all that means, right? As far as I can tell, God's plan, in order for God's plan to be carried out the way that God wants it, the way God decrees it to be carried out, requires that it doesn't require of him, but he permits this evil to occur in order for his plan to occur, to be fulfilled. That means those things should have happened. That means that in that if you're taking a relatively narrow definition of good to be, that which should occur, and evil is that which should not occur, from kind of any approach that you're using the should and shouldn't, right? Then it's really hard to try to turn around and say, well, the Germans should not have done that. Nazi Germany should not have done that according to what God prescribes. However, according to God's plan, the fact that it occurred was good relative to God's permissive will. Relative to. I think it's interesting that even when these guys talk about this, they avoid using the word relative to even talk about this, because that's what they're doing. Relative to his permissive will, and maybe he has actually dropped the word. I don't know. I didn't catch it if he did. Relative to his permissive will, the Holocaust on balance is good, right? Even though curing atheism came in there and basically said, well, I don't think a human couldn't really weigh things on balance, quote unquote. Even though he then later went on and contradicted himself and went ahead and did that by saying the Holocaust was justified because it led to the establishment of the modern state of Israel. So curing atheism, basically shot himself in the foot there. Relative to God, what God wants you to do, though, the fact that you went and did something naughty, that was bad. Okay. He's trying to dismiss the moral sense. JRobin is saying what should be focused on is the command of God, not the desires of God. God desires abortions, but God commands no abortions. The latter is his out. Yeah, I think that's it. But it's what's crazy making about this line of attack is that the entailment of the second one, right? This is part of his permissive will. He permits this thing to happen in order for his plan to come to fruition. That's the part that doesn't make sense, because it raises the real question. Does an omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent God need those means to achieve his end? Is that required in order for his plan to come about? Couldn't he have done it a different way? If I, as a human being, could come up with a way to, let's say for curing atheism's example, could we have come up with a better way to establish, if the establishment of the modern nation state of Israel is a good thing that needs to happen or should happen, right? Part of his connection is it was necessary for the Holocaust to be inflicted upon the Jews by Nazi Germany in order for that result to be met. Are we sure about that? And could God have done it a different way? Could God have permitted something else to happen? Either a lesser evil or used his grace to inspire an enormous amount of good. But he didn't do that, did he?
So it's good because God.
It's not good because it's just good insofar as good is defined as is God's permissive will. There's no because here. I don't know what because means. It's just good is just that which is in accordance with God's permissive will, which is everything.
So there's a sense. So there's a sense in which then, okay, so right. So when you and I talk about what's good or bad, we're talking about prescriptive, is what you're basically saying.
Yeah, okay, this is going to get interesting. Alpha K91, thank you very much for the super chat. Metatron, I'm coming for you. More coffee for Jeffy. Thank you. I appreciate the caffeine fund. Although I haven't been drinking a lot of caffeine lately. All I had today was a cup of green tea, and that's my old ass is ramped up just from that. But I appreciate it. It goes into that fund. So thank you very much for that super chat. Metatron, is that a Transformers reference? It's too early for that. Or is it Metatron? Isn't Metatron an angel? I think he's in the. Yeah, never mind. Yeah, it was an archangel, wasn't it? God is running low on archangels.
Most circumstances, yeah.
Then what work is permissive will doing?
Okay, let's take that back just a couple seconds here. Let's try that
As
again.
God
It's not good because it's just good insofar as good is defined as is God's permissive will. There's no because here. I don't know what because means. It's just good is just that which is in accordance with God's permissive will, which is everything.
So there's a sense. So there's a sense in which then, okay, so right. So the real. So when you and I talk about what's good or bad, we're talking about prescriptive, is what you're basically saying.
So conventionally,
yeah.
Then what?
In most circumstances, yes. Okay, in most circumstances. Okay, so let's say it's like 90% of the time. If I'm saying something is good or bad, I'm saying it's good and bad in the sense that God doesn't want you to do that.
Work is permissive will doing. Like if everything's good according to permissive, I mean, then what explanatory power does that have? I mean, if everything is good,
it's with reference to God's sovereignty, the fact that God is sovereign over all creation.
I mean, but like, what kind of moral explanation does it do?
I don't know what I didn't try to invoke any moral explanation. I just said that everything is happening with reference.
He's not asking. He's just wondering. Yes,
God's permissive will.
I guess this is just a very odd concept because it seems like
odd to you. That sounds like a psychological problem, Roger.
What the fuck? Jesus Christ, JRobin. Well, if it's odd to you, that sounds like a psychological problem. This is odd to everyone. Christians struggle with this concept of this permissive versus prescriptive will stuff. There's a reason a lot of Christians don't actually talk about it, especially with us skeptics. Alpha writes that $9.99 is good for green tea, green coffee, civet coffee, really anything that pisses off the Mormons. It seems like that you're just motivated to get me to engage in habits that trigger Mormons. I don't know if that's really the best way, but I'll take it. Yeah, I will be your instrument for triggering Mormons. Revelation News calls himself Metatron, and we all fuck on him by calling him Megatron. Revelation News, is that Jason from the Rev and Shanny stuff? I didn't know he called himself Metatron. Yeah, Josephus, I don't think Jay realizes that literally anything that does or could happen is good according to his theory. Yeah, it doesn't seem like he's capable of kind of wrapping his head around the some of the problematic entailments of what is happening. And Roger's trying to lay that out. It's not working. Yes, Jason from Rev and Shanny. Yeah, okay. Ugh. I didn't know he called himself Metatron. Ugh, cringy.
For you.
No. So it seems but like as in but there's like a rational issue here.
Okay,
the rational issue is that you're saying that there's a sense in which because God permitted the Holocaust and it's a part of His permissive will, then it's good. And it works as a.
I didn't say because it's look again.
It's a predicate. It's an implicated predicate. So you're saying for all X, if X is a part of God's permissive will, then X is good. There exists an X such that X is a Holocaust and that X is part of God's permissive will. Therefore, the Holocaust is good. That's the form of your argument, logically speaking. You would use universal existential instantiation, and then that's just it. But the weird thing about that is the conclusion. It logically follows from those first two statements that the Holocaust would be good. Like that's
like, good in what sense?
Okay, tell me where you disagree. For all
go to once the permissive sense, ding dong, the one that you keep the one that you keep escaping to in the prescriptive sense doesn't work.
What do you mean by good? I just want to know. What do you mean by good?
What I mean is that God permitted, like it's morally advisable.
We already agreed. Like, so the Holocaust is good insofar as it's permitted by God. Yeah.
I don't even know if there's anything more I need to say. If
Yeah,
Okay.
I didn't say
I
it
think
was morally good. I didn't say that killing people was in accordance with God's prescriptive will. So I don't see the problem here.
I think any of this other stuff is irrelevant. If you can't find a contradiction, then I think that's
Yeah, like
where
I don't see any tension. I don't see any contradiction. I don't see any problem here that I should be considering.
It just
I don't see any problem.
it makes you countenance a very
No, it doesn't.
counterintuitive.
No, it does not.
Okay,
It
I
doesn't
mean,
make me do that.
I'll leave that
No, it doesn't. He hadn't finished the statement, but no, it doesn't.
to the. I'll leave
So Roger's like, it makes you countenance a counterintuitive type of morality. JRobin is already squealing. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
other people to adjudicate on whether or not you having to say that
Okay.
there's a certain
Alright.
sense in which the Holocaust was
Well,
good.
you're talking to me, right?
is
You're
an
talking to
odd
me,
view.
Roger. No, because by
Right,
good,
but you're
we're
never
just
going
talking
to
about.
you're never going
Yeah,
to
but
concede on anything.
Roger,
so
Roger. Good does not refer to whether or not something is morally and with respect to God's prescriptive will. That's not what we're saying. That's not what good means here, right? So all we're saying is something is good. It's occurring, really. We're just saying it's good. That means it's occurring. It's a part of God's overall permissive will. If that's what by good means, there's not controversial to anyone. So there's no countenance. There's nothing that needs to be countenance here, or whatever.
Right.
Whatever. Like
Right, but
there's no tension here.
right. I mean, the tension is that you're saying that everything that is permitted is good, but then when I challenge
Everything that's
you on
permitted is permitted. Everything that's permitted is permitted. Yeah.
right, but that's just a
What's the
meaningless
contradiction?
statement. That statement's meaningless, right?
No, it's not. Oh, no, it is not.
A
The
is
word
A is
good
not
just
meaningless. A is
no,
A is A is a
no,
tautology.
Roger. I don't say. I just say
Oh my
when
God.
I say the word when I say it's good, I will say it's good. When I mean by good is that it's referring to the fact of the matter that is fulfilling God's sovereign decree. So we can use the word good, or we can use the word is sovereign decree. We don't need, but you're using the words in like the same sentence in like in a circular kind of fashion, or you're trying to equivocate between what good means in this sense and what good might mean in another sense, and that's the problem you're running into.
I mean, so you're saying that what is permitted is a non-tautological statement.
I don't say what is permitted is good. I just say that God is. I say it's good insofar, or good as defined as it is a part of God's. It is a part of God's overall sovereign plan.
Yeah, I don't think Roger's missing that point, right? Like it's good in the sense that it's what God wants to happen for his plan, right? But that's the problem, right? It starts to break down what good means, right? It's bad. It's an evil thing this person did, but it's good because it's part of God's plan, right? You start to so it's both good and bad. It shouldn't have happened, but it also should have happened. In the sense that this person should not be doing that, it should not have happened. In the sense that what he did is necessary for the fulfillment of God's plan, it should have happened. It is both good and bad. The issue is that rationally, this entails a contradiction. JRobin's not seeing it.
That's what I say.
So
That's
everything.
that's what I said this whole time.
So everything.
Yeah, yeah. And if that's how you're defining good, I already made that statement already.
But you don't define good that way.
I define good in that context. Yeah, I define good in other ways. I have multiple different definitions of good as you do.
No. I
You
mean,
might have different.
Okay, so then how do you know which one to? So when you see a child being raped, are you like, well, which sense of the word good do I apply here?
No, you can use both.
Use
You can use both senses of good.
Right.
Something could be out of accord of God's. Something could be good in one sense and not good in the other sense. It's very easy to judge because God has revealed what is good in one sense and what is good in the other sense. So it's very easy in many circumstances to judge those two things that just have different definitions of good, and you can apply them.
So is there a sense in which
So it's just relative. The only thing that would be definitive in that is just what God chooses to reveal to you, right? God has revealed it to us that murder is bad, but God has also revealed to us that when these bad things happen, it's part of his plan. So in that case, the fact that a murder occurred was good. And we'll just sort of, we're just going to sort of walk that weird line. We're just going to live with what is a rational contradiction.
sense in which abortion is good because God permits it?
Good is just everything that God permits again. So
abortion.
If good is, but that's not all good is. Good is just what God permits. No, that's not what all good is. Good is also doing what God prescribed you to do. Like now he's getting into territory. Now he's getting into territory I'm more comfortable with, because you have two tiers of goodness. What he permits, which can include all good things and bad things. That's just every action that occurs. Every phenomena that occurs in the world happens because God does it, right? And that is, I have to say, that is at least consistent with where JRobin and Darth Dawkins usually get when they're talking about their definition of God as not only being the creator of the universe, but the active sustainer of that universe. Everything that happens is according to his plan, and the only reason that it is happening is because God put it in motion and keeps it in motion with his power. Cool. But he just made a statement there casually, good is just what God permits. That is not what good just is. Because if that's all that it is, then it's good that the Holocaust happened. It's good that that murder happened. It's good in those same ways that Roger was putting it. But when Roger would put it that way, JRobin would object to that wording. It's not good in the sense that the person did it. It's good in the sense that it somehow fulfills God's plan. Okay, then that's good is not just the one. Good is both of those, at least two things. And you can have both things, or you can have one or the other. Actually, it'd be interesting if you could have one or the other. So think of it this way. A person can do the good thing, the thing that God wants you to do, to honor, to love yourself with all your heart, to love your neighbor as yourself, to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, right? The New Testament kind of wrap-up thing. So let's say that somebody does something that is part of what God prescribes us to do that is good, right? You save a life, you feed the hungry, you give to the poor, you nurture the sick, right? You help educate a child. These kinds of things. These are all part of these kinds of things, right? You were good. You visited the prisoner, right? These are all examples of doing something you should do. You go and do this, right? That's a good thing. The fact that you did it was part what you fulfilled God's prescriptive will, and that you did what he told you to do, and you fulfilled his permissive will in the sense that that good thing happened because it was part of God's plan, right? Now, if you do something that violates the prescriptive will, like committing a murder or engaging in genocide, apparently that is also part of God's permissive will, but it's not part of his prescriptive will. What I wonder is, can you do something? Does a human being have the capacity, right, to do something? So if you do something good prescriptively, it's permissively good. If you do something bad, it's prescriptively bad, but it's still permissively good. I'm wondering if JRobin would see it that way. Like, is that kind of illustrating what the issue is here? That's the problem, right? On balance, there's no such thing from the broader scheme of things, from God's permissive will, what is necessary for the fulfillment of his plan. There is no difference between when I do something good or I do something bad in the prescriptive sense. And that's an issue. That's kind of a problem, right?
So abortion is good then, right?
Abortion is permitted, yeah.
No. But everything that's
But everything that's permitted is good.
permitted is good. You said that
You
before.
see how you're
Yeah.
talking?
Yeah,
So
but
saying-
but you want to use.
Oh,
This
no.
is the point. This is the dishonesty. This is the
He's
dishonesty
being
because you
deceptive with his
want to use the
language.
word good.
He just said good is just what God permits. So if it stands to reason that is just saying that abortion is good is just rephrasing that. JRobin wants to be able to say good is just what God permits. Okay, so what about abortion? Abortion is something that God permits. Then it follows that abortion is good because what is permitted is just what is good. I mean, watching these guys and the kind of intellectual collapse that these guys have been happening lately, this is almost as bad as the video that I did yesterday of Darth Dawkins equivocating knowledge with belief.
Good. You want to use the word good because you know that many people have a different conception of the word good. So you don't want to use like the exact same. It's the exact same thing.
Bro, but he's being deceptive in how he's speaking. He
Right,
said
I know.
abortion is
Everyone
good.
knows that. Everyone like
So,
it's so
the way-
easy to see. It's so easy to see.
The way he's saying that.
It's so easy to see that Roger is being deceptive. How is he being deceptive? It follows. I'm going to say this again. If JRobin just said it, someone can take the quote out. Good is just that which God permits, right? That's not a verbatim quote, but that's what he said. Good is just what is permitted by God. Okay. If abortion is permitted by God, therefore, abortion is good. No, that can't be right. Exactly. Like, this is the interesting thing about this. Rhetorically, right, rationally, what JRobin and now Tone is getting triggered too, and that's always entertaining. They've run into something that's problematic, right? What are they going to do? Are they going to work on this? Are they going to think about this? Are they going to go explore this more? Are they going to think about maybe not approaching permissive and permitted and prescriptive will in this way? No, they've accepted these theological concepts. They must be true, right? They can't possibly be wrong. And so if they're running into these difficulties, thanks to Roger, it's Roger's fault. Roger's the one to blame. Burn the witch.
It like comes out as an oversimplification.
No, he realizes that everyone that not everyone, but like a lot of in general speak, right? The word good has a much different meaning than what we're using in this conversation. So he wants to keep using the word good. He wants to keep using the word good for the sake of the audience, for the sake of everyone else, to try to hide around this.
Did you say that good? Did you say that good and permitted?
Yes, I did.
Are
they are the same thing. That's why.
You just did it again. Good and permitted are the same thing.
That's why. That's why.
Right.
No, but listen, Roger, you're not this stupid. You realize that the word good has many different meanings, and
Roger isn't stupid, but I'm really convinced that JRobin simply is stupid.
Most of the time, good is not used to refer to this, right? And so when you use the word good, in the minds of many people, in the minds of maybe yourself, in the minds of the audience, a lot of times it may revert to a more traditional understanding of good, or a more common understanding of good. It's not the one that we're using here. So it has nothing to do with my clarity of defining the words. It has to do with the proclivity for people to associate the word good with something that is not being talked about here.
Okay.
So we can just say it is in accord with God's permissive will and leave it at that, because that's what we mean by good anyways.
But you said that
use the word good.
You said
the word good.
Here's basically what I believe Rogers.
Nothing that JRobin attempted to do there in his attempt to explain away his position is making any sense or really getting him out of this problem. He made the statement twice that good is that permissible and good are basically equivalent, right? And when that was applied in the statement, abortion is permissible, therefore abortion is good, he flipped out. Now all of a sudden it doesn't work. I think the more I engage in this, I really think it's necessary for a real comprehensive curriculum of critical thinking skills really needs to be, installed into the public school system.
It'll be like we're having a conversation about someone who was raped, right? And this person dealt with the emotional scars of rape. But here's the thing: they took that experience to impact other people in a positive way, and to be an inspiration to others on how they can, go forward in life, how they can find healing, all that good stuff. And then you turn around and say, "Well, so rape is good." That's exactly what that's like.
Hey,
obviously,
Ray, I think that this is okay.
Obviously, what we're doing is we're saying there are things that are morally prescriptively bad. But then when you say, "Well, so rape is good," even though
I like how Tone is appealing to the idea of comforting people. This is part of the issue. People with a decent IQ and with some good critical, and I'm not trying to say that to be snobby, that always snobby when somebody appeals to IQ, but somebody with some decent critical thinking skills, right? If they're being quote unquote comforted by a Christian who is appealing to something like this, it's not comforting, it's worrying. That's part of the issue, right? This was part of what Roger was talking about before. The conviction with which Christians can declare that a murderer is wrong for having murdered, but then tell the loved ones of the victim that on balance, the fact that their loved one was viciously attacked and fatally harmed is part of God's plan is cold comfort, right? And seems to be really weak sauce compared to all that conviction they had for, well, you violated God's prescriptive will, and then go to the survivors, the loved ones of the victim, and tell them it's part of God's permissive will that your loved one was harmed in this horrible way and then taken from you. That's at the issue. Tones is like, I can't believe you're talking about this when it's supposed to be a source of comfort. But that's the problem. It's not really a source of comfort. You're engaging in a blatant contradiction, in a weird relativistic conception of good, right? If it's not relativistic, then it is a contradiction by saying that it was wrong that this person did this to this person, but it was right that that victim died. and you should be comforted because hopefully they're there with the Lord. The Christian even making that kind of thing, like, well, as long as they were a faithful Christian, you'll see them again in heaven, or not. Are they going to say that part out loud? Or maybe you won't. And if you lose your faith because that's what God wills, you'll that's it. You get to spend the rest of the life that God permits you to have in grief, missing your child. And due to that grief, that may cause you to pull away from that faith. And because God withholds the transformative power of his grace from you because it's necessary for his plan that you spend the rest of eternity in eternal conscious torment, you may never see your daughter again. Maybe that's what Christians should tell people who are grieving the loss of a loved one.
What they went through prescriptively was bad. You see
Okay.
what you're doing right there? You're being very slippery with your language.
Well, I mean,
no one is saying
I
that
don't think
rape
I don't
is
think
good.
I'm being.
No one is
I
saying
mean,
abortion's good.
I mean, on other moral theories, right? You don't have this distinction between prescriptive and
I
permissive.
don't care about other moral.
Yeah, you don't. JRobin comes in. No, you don't. Think what Tone is accusing Roger of being slippery with language when Roger is talking about the problem of slippery language in terms of permissive and permitted wills and these kinds of relativistic definitions of good. That's slippery language. But no. There's nothing wrong with this slippery language. The problem is you, Roger. The problem is you. You can't figure this out. You don't understand how this works. It's, as JRobin said, it's very simple. It's very simple. You're a smart guy. Congratulations. You're really intelligent. I'm so scared of Roger's big brain, right? But you can't even understand the difference between permissive and permitted will. Like, this is sad. Like, this is the tiny sandbox of which JRobin is king, right? And he will piss in it and then kick it at you. Sorry, that's gross. Ugh. I shouldn't have used that imagery. I offended myself. Yeah, and then Telnook, of course, is helpful to come in here, and I appreciate Josephus Rivero's comment that, yeah, having Tone as a backup is like reaching for a backup pistol and in your holster is a dead trout. Yeah, or a rubber chicken.
Goodness. So
care.
like I'm not
With a
being
squeaker.
slippery because I don't have this concept of permissive goodness, right? So I don't
I don't care,
understand why.
sir. Stop.
We're talking about it.
It
I
seems
don't
like
care.
you're.
I don't care about stop. I don't care about other moral theories. I just care about the simple point I made to you. Like, if I tell you someone can use their experience of a horrific situation like rape to impact others positively, and then you say, "Well, so rape is good." Don't you see how disingenuous that is?
Well, I mean, just to I noticed Rody came up high. No, but
No, stop. Answer my question. Don't you see how disingenuous that is?
Yeah, it's disingenuous to. Hang on a second. Somebody had just mentioned that my sounds like my audio might be getting kind of gnarly again. Let me try another setting on here and see, because every once in a while it sounds like this thing gets like super gainy, and I don't know if that's StreamYard or the headset. But let me try. There was an audio setting that I turned off. I'm going to try turning it back on. Let me know in the side chat if this gets too quiet. All right, how is that sounding now? I can kind of listen in a little bit and see if I'm coming through okay. I think that might be a little clearer, a little less gainy. I might be quieter, but let's see. Oh, okay. Just got here. Yeah, my mic is not up to my usual quality. Yeah, using a different laptop, and unfortunately, because I didn't take into account some of these ports, I'm not connected into one. I'm having to use a Bluetooth one, and what I've got is an earpiece. So not the greatest mics. So yeah, sounds a little shitty.
again, I think that it might be an implication of your view. So I don't know. To me, it would be disingenuous. On my worldview, it would be disingenuous. I don't know on your worldview if it would be disingenuous or not.
Yeah, this is just.
Well, this is effectively what you're doing. You're not taking into account.
Like okay, so
okay. You know what, man? I think it's quite obvious what you're trying to do here. I think it's quite obvious that you're just trying to purposely make mountains out of molehills. Because the bottom line is this: unless you can find a necessary contradiction in the existence of evil or rape or any things like this occurring, you just don't have an argument. You just don't have a case. It's really that simple.
I think what Roger's trying to point out, though, is neither does the Christian, though. If they're going to try to rely on this double standard or this kind of like swing, the shifting standard of goodness, that's what Roger's talking about, right? Like he doesn't have a definition of good that it's good in one sense, but then good in another sense, right? In a sense that makes it seem like the other sense, it might be contradicting the first sense. And what's Tone's contribution to this? Oh, you're just doing this to raise objections. I mean, this is the best that Tone can do, right? If somebody disagrees with something theologically, Tone will just accuse that person of attempting to disparage Christianity for the purposes of creating more skeptics. That's about all he can do.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm like I have no problem with being a Christian after this conversation. Like, there's nothing you've given me to think about at all.
Okay,
Nothing.
sure. I mean,
That said, JRobin basically exclaiming he doesn't have anything to think about here. Nothing that Roger has said has given JRobin anything to think about. JRobin doesn't need to consider some of the problematic entailments of holding these two relativistic concepts of good at the same time. A person who damns relativism on a semi-regular basis.
I mean, there are other things, but I think sticking to this point is kind of interesting. We can move on to a different topic, or like go back to the original topic that we were kind of going into, because I've crystallized some of my thoughts there. But I think that really the critical point here is that previously in the conversation, you said there's a sense of the word good that is synonymous with permissive will. So, in a sense, the Holocaust was good. And I'm saying, well, in that same sense, abortion would be good. And then there was like this resistance, which was like, no, that's very disingenuous.
I didn't say no. I didn't say no. No, this is what I said.
So
I
yes,
said,
yes.
No, Roger. Again, don't put words in my mouth. Don't put words in my mouth. Please don't do that. What I said when you asked me, is abortion good? I said abortion is in accordance with God's permissive will. And then you wanted to say, oh, don't you mean good? And I was like, well, aren't they the same thing? Why can't I say the word
Yes.
permissive will? Why can't I use
Right,
that word?
they're the same thing.
And then I made the point that is so obvious. Okay, Helen Keller could see it. Okay, with her eyes.
Dude, that's ableist.
Okay, you are intentionally using the word good in a way that it may seem to other people who are just listening, who may have just joined, to people who are listening, just anyone who's listening, because you're trying to do this as a rhetorical device anyway. You're trying to get other people to kind of
Oh my God.
see the absurdity that isn't there, but you're.
Okay, so in attempting to rephrase what JRobin is saying, when JRobin says that good just means that which is permissible, and then Roger brings up, okay, so if you're saying that abortions happen and they're permissible, right? That is the same as saying that abortions are good. But now JRobin is saying, oh, the only reason that you're putting it that way is because that's something that you can do to throw people off. Because when you say it that way, you're appealing to a notion of good that will make people think that my God is bad. I think that's where he's going with this. When all Roger's doing is just following the train of rationality. If good is just that which is permissible, that which God permits, then and abortions are permitted, then it follows from that you can say it's exactly the same as saying, in the sense that JRobin means it, that abortion is good. JRobin doesn't like the way that sounds because that's what follows from the way he's putting that out there. I wouldn't even say abortion is good in that sense, right? I don't think abortion is just a good, right? I think the right for women to choose to have an abortion is good. The fact that women are in positions where they unfortunately, have to consider terminating a pregnancy, I think, isn't great. I think that medical technology should get to the point where women have full and total, consistent, accurate, safe, side effect free control over their reproductive cycles. I think that's the moonshot. That's the brass ring. That's what we want to get, right? That's what we should have. Then women aren't in a position where they're incidentally pregnant, accidentally pregnant, inadvertently pregnant, unplanned pregnancy, and they have to make that kind of choice. They can just prevent it from the get-go, and they've got something reliable that allows them to do that, and it isn't a bunch of hormones that can lead to making them sick. make them vulnerable to other things, right? That's what I think is good. Not abortion is good, but the way that JRobin is like, so he's trying to say, like, what you're trying to do is put words in my mouth and say that what I'm saying is abortion is good. Roger is trying to point out it follows from the way that JRobin has set this up that abortion is permissible, therefore abortion is good, because good equals permissible. And JRobin doesn't want to deal with that. He doesn't want to deal with the entailments of the things he's saying. He's just going to blame Roger for, quote, putting words into his mouth and making it sound like JRobin is saying that. It sounds like JRobin's saying that because that is what JRobin's saying. That logically follows from what else he said.
You're trying to get them to see some authority that you hold that my position has. Okay, which is by using the word good. You're not saying it, but the word good has a different definition of what we're using it in, right? So what I'm doing is I'm bringing clarity. I'm saying, okay, yeah, if you want to use the word good as it's been defined, I can use the term, I define the word good as perfectly fine, and you don't need to get pushback against it, which you did. And I'm wondering why you did that.
Well, I did that. I did that because, as you just said, the sense in which you're describing good.
Yeah, so everything is within. Everything is within. I don't really use the word good here. I mean, when I say like the Bible says that everything that happens is for the good of those who love Him, right? So we're saying that everything is ultimately going to be according to God's sovereign plan, right? So
the good, it works out great for Christians, right? But that's just a fancy way of saying, you know what? No matter what happens, when you die, you end up in paradise, so no biggie. That's just kind of a dismissive way of putting it, right? But that's different than talking about the permissive will, right? If you're trying to invoke this notion that some of these bad things are happening because they're part of God's plan, right? And there's an implication built into that they need to happen, they should have happened, and they could have only happened that way in order for God's plan to come to fruition, and no alternative could be forthcoming. And the reason, the proof of that lack of alternative is the fact that it happened that way. God being an ultimate being, the only things that happen are the things God allows to happen. So definitionally, it could have only been that way. So I guess that answers the question. Could God have done it differently? Nope. Would God have done it differently? Nope. Then why did he do it that way? Well, for some reason, he needs in this world for there to be a certain amount of evil to occur in order for his plan to come to full fruition. The way he set it out, right? Even though a plan, from our perspective, is you set these things up in motion and then you hope that they will come to pass. Planning for an omniscient God is really kind of irrelevant, right? It's simply going to play out that way. This isn't planning, this is written. It's a novel that God knows the beginning, middle, and end of already. Could he do things differently? Now, if you're going to say he's already committed to it because it's already been done, God is a tenseless being, okay, maybe. But then you'd have to ask, okay, it's tenseless for him, but it's almost past tense for us. Could he change it? He's tenseless. He could come in and interrupt at any time. Like Darth believes that God engages in these temporal actions, even though he's a non-temporal thing.
Okay.
In a few circumstances, we're using the word good with respect to God's sovereign plan, but most of the cases, but most of the time, like even the things that God allows to happen in that verse, right? It says that God, everything that happens is for the good of those who. Though everything that happens isn't good in another sense, obviously, right? There's
right.
persecution. There's things that are happening that are bad.
Right.
So when the Bible uses the word good in that sense, it's not saying that they're good, right?
Why are they bad?
This is kindergarten. This is kindergarten.
Why are they bad?
Like this is obvious, right? Okay, they're bad insofar as they're out of accord with God's prescriptive will. Okay.
Okay.
That's what the word.
So they're out of accord with what God prescribes. Okay, but they're good in the sense that God allows it, and what God allows is good. Or like what part of its permissive will, if you will.
If by good you're talking about God's exercise of His sovereign control over the world, then every exercise of God, the act of God exercising His sovereignty in every moment is good.
Okay. Okay.
So this is relative good. Good relative to what God is trying to exercise in order for His plan. It's evil in the sense that what a person did violated God's prescriptive will. What He tells you is right and wrong. So good is relative.
So, yeah, Rody, yeah, sure, go ahead. What he was saying before was there are two senses of good. There's one sense which is permissive, and there is another sense that's prescriptive. It was
So it looks like there was a fast forward there, and I think they got Rhodey caught up. So
Wasn't okay. Well, if we define it as permissive, then it's going to be like this. There are two active senses of good, so it's like this pluralistic concept, as opposed to like if you were to have some like really hedonic consequentialist view where there's only like a monistic conception of the good. This is like a pluralistic conception. And what I'm saying is that means that there must be a sense in which this is good, and that just seems counterintuitive. And
no, the reason it's counterintuitive is because you're importing another definition of good that was not at all present in my definition of good. That's the only reason it's counter. And I told you that's what you're trying to exploit when you're trying to use the word good and trying to push back.
I'm kind of confused as to why Roger hasn't just pointed out. Look, these two notions of good are relative, or at the very least they're relative, right? But they also entail some contradictions. There are contradictions entailed in this. That God does not want you to do this, but God wants this to happen. Like, I don't want you to kill people, but as it turns out, I need you to kill that person. So get to work.
Against me when you want to say that certain things are good. The only reason it's counterintuitive to you is because you're not using the definition of good that I gave you. That's the only reason it's counterintuitive.
I don't really think that's true.
No, it's not. Is it counterintuitive to say Is it counterintuitive to say that things that are happening and that are in accordance with God's sovereign will, assuming that Christianity is true? Is that counterintuitive at all?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's why there's
What is counterintuitive? What is counterintuitive about? Stop. What is counterintuitive about saying that everything that happens is in accordance with God's sovereign will? What is counterintuitive about that?
That's not all that's being said. Everything that happens happens according to God's sovereign will. Okay. We'll just take that into advice. It's as if JRobin didn't pay attention to any of the stuff that Roger brought up at the beginning, right? The fact that Christians can be so convinced, so certain as to what they understand about God's will when it comes to doing something good and bad, right? And they justify that by saying, well, what this person did violated God's prescriptive will, right? Like, so state law states that this shouldn't have happened, right? But in terms of the grand scheme of things, maybe it should have happened, right? But you were naughty. You were naughty when you killed that person. It's weird that God needed you to do that, but God's mysterious, and His will be done. Blah blah blah. That's what's counterintuitive about it, right? If you're going to present a sales pitch for a God that is all good, that requires a certain amount of evil to happen in a world to achieve the ends that He already knows. These are results that He's already lived through, He's experiencing, has experienced, will experience. He's a tenseless being. Why is any of this necessary? Why? I mean, this is a way to this is a weird way to justify bad things happening in the world and getting God off the hook for it. He permits it because it's part of His plan. That's all this is, right? To get God off the hook for the way He set up the world in which we live, right? But not even just that, right? They're willing to I think anybody's willing to understand that, okay, God creates the world, people make some choices, we're at odds with God, things don't go so well, we can do things that are kind of violate, the prescriptive will thing. God says don't kill, we kill anyway. Okay. All right. So things can get shitty because we can disobey what God wants us to do, right? The idea of doing the permissible thing really is a way to get people out of, is to get God off the hook because of the implications of what people they credit God for. God whispered in my ear and told me to take the left street instead of the right street, and I didn't drive through that fire. I didn't get hit by that falling tree. God warned me about marrying that man, and it turns out he was an abusive weirdo and a pervert. They credit God for taking some kind of intervention act in their life and it made it better. But when something happens that makes somebody's life definitively worse, that's just as good as when God intervenes in somebody's life and makes it better, right? Because that's just what God permits. But it's really hard for people to wrap their head around the fact that, why did God help that person with something as trivial as, like, some people will credit it with all sorts of things. God saved me money on my car bill. Well, like God's an insurance company or something. He saved me money on my insurance. God got me a great rate on my mortgage. God helped me find the love of my life. God protected us on our trip to Mexico. Whatever it is that, we could have drowned at sea if we had taken that cruise ship instead of the one that I felt God wanted me to take, right? People do this all the time, right? So what happens when you try to apply that kind of stuff to, well, we drove our car off the cliff. Guess God wanted this too. Why on earth would God do this? Why would he allow this to happen? He saved me from that cruise ship that went under, only for me to end up sliding down falling down a mudslide on a donkey during during an excursion in Mexico. He saved me from this, but then he sent me down here. I guess this is what God wants. It's all part of the plan, folks. That's what's the problem with this, right?
Because little children got gassed in a gas chamber, and it doesn't seem like that's what's counterintuitive about it. That's why there's a problem with evil.
What is counterintuitive about saying that God lets it happen? It's a part of God's sovereign will. What is counterintuitive about that? Where's
Because people credit God with good stuff and then can't figure out the bad stuff, right? And then God let the bad stuff happen, but God actively helped me with the good. That's where this problem comes from. This really is more of a thing for Christians to have to wrestle with, right? This is one of those things, because this is one of those things that challenges people's faith. It's easy for Christians to wrap their heads around the fact that a person did something that was against what God wanted, right? But in terms of what God's plan is, isn't everything working out according to God's will? How do we wrap our heads around the fact that a person can do something as bad as murder, but the fact that it's happening in the world, and it really did happen, must have happened because God needed that to happen in order to justify the ends he needs. So he's using murder as a means to his end. His end. Sorry. So for them, the idea behind this is, oh, okay, so God has a permissive will. He permits a certain amount of evil to happen, or these certain bad things to happen because it's necessary for his plan, right? That's the only reason that this is. This is just a way of trying to salvage a conflict in this notion, right, that Christians have. And it's actually one of the things that helps kind of like this kind of conflict, this cognitive bias that is generated by this tension can reduce people's faith quite a bit. Right? I think it actually worked on an individual that I knew. It was one of the things that worked for him because for him it was an observation that he made. People were willing to use this kind of language, this permissive will language, to hand wave the bad away, but were more than willing to credit God directly for good things that happened to them. And they were just as convinced and just as certain that good thing happened because God wanted it to happen, right? But when it came to the evil thing, they were less certain about what God's desire was for that to happen. It was just that it had to. It's bad that it happens. It's unfortunate, but he had to have that happen in order for other things to happen, right? But that gets really weird, right? Will a Christian then make the observation, the reason God saved me from that cruise ship was because God allowed my child to be murdered? If anybody started making those kinds of connections, people would be like, I think you might be losing your mind, or you've eaten all the drugs or something, right? Like something's going wrong. But I don't see how I don't see why it would be a problem, given what JRobin's laying out here, for a person not to think that that's the case. I can be rest assured that God will protect me during my travels abroad because he killed my kid. He allowed my kid to die. Why not? Right? And they could just go to subjective experience. No, I prayed about this trip, and I just feel that God has assured me that I will be perfectly safe. And I feel that way because we actually went through this tragedy already, where I lost a loved one to this horrible crime. So maybe I'm not doing it. It's almost like this sort of like dollar store karma mentality that they apply to God.
Where is this opposed tension or contradiction here about saying that they
I'm not saying.
Okay, so what do you mean? What do you mean by it's counterintuitive? What does that mean?
The point, okay, Jay. So Roger, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? So I think what he's trying to say is that semantically, when you use the word good, right, when it can refer to gassing of children, we will be uncomfortable in saying that this is good. Although under your definition, it will be good, right? Because
exactly.
Yeah, and this is the counterintuition part. It's not about the contradiction. It's about how we use the terms themselves.
Yeah, so I'm not using the word good to refer. I'm not using the word good to refer to like it's morally
right.
So what
we're doing in moral philosophy here is we're saying
no,
that
it is not.
if you have a definition
So
of
that's a
good,
problem. That's a problem. That's a problem then with how you are reconciling my definitions in your mind.
no,
It's
no,
not
no.
fine with
So
me.
this is the
Because if I
critique.
want to say
Okay.
that good, as Rody said, if I define the word good as a chair, okay,
What?
and I say that something might be bad, but I use the word good in the sense that it's referring to a chair, okay. Well, it may seem counterintuitive because we're not using the word good in the way that we might normally use it, but it doesn't make it. It doesn't. There's no irreconcilable, or there's no problem here with respect to like a contradiction, because all that's being said here is that we're using a different definition of good. We're not using a definition of good that's saying that it's morally right.
Well, then why did he compare it to a chair? That didn't get him anywhere.
So okay. So when you so
So
again,
the Holocaust is not morally right. That's not what I mean when I say it's good.
you
That's
just
not what good.
That's not okay. But now he's actually going on a limb and saying that it's good. Well, that's weird because he seemed to object to like the idea that when he said that good is just what is permissible and abortion is permissible, therefore abortion it can be said to be good. He claimed that words were being put into his mouth. But now he's confidently saying that I can say that the Holocaust is good, but I don't mean that it's good in the fact that they should have done it. It's good in the fact that it should have happened. But that might be hard for a lot of people to accept, right? Like, yeah, they shouldn't have done it, but God needed them to do it. Well, from the perspective, like, so it's weird to get a sense on what they mean by this. Didn't God need these people to do that in order for His plan to be fulfilled? Well, God doesn't need anything. Okay, so then why did the Holocaust happen? Because it's part of God's plan, and He permitted that evil to happen because that helps fulfill His plan. That's integral to any of these things would be integral to fulfilling His plan.
you just mean okay. So then again, so it just seems like your view has a lot of conceptual confusion to it. Like that's really unnecessary. It doesn't seem like it's doing work for you. So I think this is a problem with the theory.
No,
and this
we're just explaining. We're saying that everything that happens is a product of God's exercise of sovereignty.
okay.
Which is perfectly useful. That's a useful definition of good because God is actually morally good in actually exercising His sovereignty.
Okay.
Right. Okay. But He exercises His sovereignty when He tells us not to do certain things and tells us that certain things should be done. But He's also exercising His sovereignty by allowing the things that He's prescribed not to be done in order to fill an overall plan. There's some tension there.
Okay. So
Okay, but we're also saying that the result by good in a different sense. Now we're saying that good is good insofar as they are contributing to God's sovereign will, right?
Okay.
But not that they're morally good.
Let's break this down. So are the things that are exercised okay? So morally good, right? So, I mean, I think maybe this is the point that Rody was kind of bringing up, which is that when I say that something is counterintuitive, it seems like we have a very clear. I'm not going to say clear, like pre-theoretically, we have a decent understanding of what the notion of good is or what the notion of bad is, at least when we're doing applied ethics and whatnot. And it seems like when you wheel.
Okay, this is going to get fraught. I'm just taking a pause there. He's already bringing up something. This is going to like we have a pretty good idea of how we would use when we're talking about applied ethics, how we would talk about good. This is I think Roger's walking into something dangerous. I wouldn't be surprised if Tone starts to go volcanic again. Maya, how are we this far into the conversation and he still hasn't established a definition of good? Well, he attempted to. If by he you mean JRobin, he did when he made the statement. By good, you just mean that which is, by good, all I mean is just what is permissible. And then when Roger very logically, rationally led that through, so abortion is permissible, abortions occur. JRobin agreed. Okay, yeah, abortions are permitted. They've been permitted. Therefore, abortions are good. And as soon as that happened, he just lost it. No, you're putting words into my mouth. Like, no, he's not. Because then JRobin turned around and said, when I say the Holocaust is good, it's not the same way it's not in the way that you say that the Holocaust is good. Okay. Well, when I say that the Holocaust is bad, I mean by bad and good, I mean good is that which should happen and bad is that which should not happen. I think that the Holocaust is bad and that the Holocaust should not have happened, right? It would have been better had it not happened. In that sense, JRobin cannot use that definition of bad. He can only judge agents for doing things that violate some kind of deontology. You weren't supposed to engage in murder, however, you did, and that was necessary for God's plan. So the Holocaust was good in the sense that it should have happened. It's only bad in the sense that humans did it, and humans are to blame for something that should have happened. This is just it's. I don't even know if I'm not even confident really to even say that there's contradictions happening here. These are definitions that are meaningless at this point.
In these concepts, we're taking these perfectly intuitive statements, and then all of a sudden, they don't, like, we have to say that there's a sense in which the Holocaust is good. And it's
You
like,
don't have
why?
to use the word good then. If that's causing you so much trouble, right? If that's
Yeah,
giving you
yeah.
that
I mean, it
anxiety
seems
or
like a
whatever,
problem
not
with
use
your
the
view
word
that
good.
you shouldn't.
Yeah, then you shouldn't say good, but then you have to end up saying something like, then he has to commit to saying the Holocaust should have happened. It was right that the Holocaust happened. It was God's will that the Holocaust occurred, right? And that's going to raise issues, not just for unbelievers.
Have a view where there's
I can use the word good and bad, and I can use words however I want to use them. Okay.
Yeah,
So
but
you
that
might have
doesn't
an issue.
mean people won't
You might have
criticize
the only issue. Yeah, no, that is the only issue you're having is how I'm defining terms and the tokens I'm using to define terms. That's the only
That's
problem
what
you're having.
philosophy is.
Okay.
That's what philosophy is.
Well, okay. Well, so then there's no actual internal problem with my position, then, is there?
Yeah, there's plenty. We're not playing this game. Yes, we are. Be mad about it.
No, I mean there is an
Okay,
internal
good, fine.
problem.
So we can.
There is.
Oh, okay. So then it's more than just how I'm defining the terms then.
Well,
I don't really get the issue here. Like when I
Here
was
comes
talking
Tomo.
about if someone is raped, then they can use their experience to positively impact others. So you could say it's good in that sense, but that's not
No, you
the
could.
same thing as saying rape itself is good. So what is the problem here exactly?
okay, yeah.
The problem is when it sounds like it was good because you were raped, Tone. That's the problem, right? The fact that somebody survives that and moves on and recovers and then grows from that and is able to help others who unfortunately experience the same thing that should not have happened, the rape, which also should not have happened to them, but they can share that experience and help those people heal and grow and recover. It's good in the sense that they have moved on, they have healed. It's what's what you but what Tone is trying to get at, and what the implication here is that they never would have had that opportunity for healing and growth had they not been viciously attacked. Therefore, it's good that they were viciously attacked. That's where it gets monstrous, which is a place that Tone Loc is more than happy to go to because
I've been talking about maybe road.
Wait.
So can I come in for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think that there are two issues here. So the first issue, which is the one that I brought up, was even if you do get a coherent sense of the idea of permissive will being equated with good in some sense, there are two resulting issues. The first,
no, it's not in some sense. This is the word good is just used as a token to define that term or define that concept. There's no sense or anything. It's just good is just defined. You're just using the word good, G-O-O-D, to talk about that concept. There's no sense or anything in a sense or partially this word may be used. No, just the word good is used in this sense, in this context, to talk about this concept.
so you don't have to say it in this sense, and then you just said in this sense. Okay.
Very simple.
Is it? I don't think anybody else would have objected to whatever the hell that was that JRobin just lost a couple brain cells over.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, but I'll just go.
You keep saying that, but I haven't heard a single contradiction or problem or tension. Or
okay, well, like
no contradictions, no problems, no tensions. Really. So it's not a problem that you guys can't come to an agreement on a working definition of good. Like JRobin's not even self-aware enough to even reflect on the conversation while he's having it, that the central disagreement that they seem to be running into is that they can't agree on this term, even though JRobin is referring to this term good as a token to mean this, this, and this. But then when Roger was seemingly accepting the token, for lack of whatever reason, that when JRobin says that good is just what's permissible and then employs it, JRobin loses his shit and doesn't want to deal with that entailment. So there's a tension right there just in what JRobin attempted to lay out. When I say good, I just mean that which is permissible. Well, abortions have happened. JRobin volunteered. Abortions are permitted. Okay. Then based on what you're saying, abortions are good. JRobin's immediate defense to that was that Roger was putting words in his mouth. Even though saying abortion is good is consistent with what JRobin meant. He turned around just a couple minutes ago, and that was 20 minutes in between the time he didn't seem to understand what was happening in the abortion part, and said that the Holocaust was good, in the sense that the Holocaust is permitted by God. That's what he means. That was all that Roger meant before. So if there's no tension here, why is JRobin having such a hard time following his own train of thought?
Like, again, to reiterate a point, I mean, I don't know what philosophy you're reading, but in philosophy,
I don't know what you're reading because you haven't presented a single problem.
I read journal
not
articles.
Successfully.
So the point is that it's very, it doesn't happen.
They're not helping you. They're not helping you.
They're not. Well, I mean, whatever non-existent thing you're reading isn't obviously helping you because you're not reading. I mean,
yeah, totally agree. Remember, I once told this ding-dong to read a 16-page paper from Stephen Mason, which provided an answer to JRobin's question. Why does God not exist? Stephen Mason's answer, because an ultimate's impossible. JRobin's reaction, I don't need homework assignments from you. Ain't nobody going to tell me how to live. School works for squares, that kind of shit.
The point is that what I'm trying to bring up.
You haven't presented a contradiction. You came here to present a contradiction or problem.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't.
Well, yes. Okay. Well, that's been your goal.
No, it hasn't. I don't think even at the beginning of this video clip did Roger indicate that he was looking to establish a contradiction.
For the extent of this conversation.
No.
Okay,
So
just hang on.
If you're talking about wait. If you're talking about presenting a problem, you would have to present like a logical problem, evidential problem, or an emotional problem. You have to present some sort of problem on some level.
Generally,
it sounds like you're trying to present like some sort of probabilistic problem of evil or something. Is that correct?
No. So let me just go back on this epistemological point. There are three types of ways in which arguments can generally be critiqued, right? So you could have undercutting defeaters, rebutting defeaters, and then you could somehow say that the logic of the argument doesn't work. Okay. So rebutting defeater is like, here's some counter evidence. Undercutting defeater is like, I undermine your evidence. Logically fallacious is like, well, here's some contradiction, or here's some fallacy that you've committed, right? So saying, unless you've shown a logical problem with my argument works, is not true. And if you spoke to any logician, they would just say, what are you talking about? I mean, so
not okay.
You haven't presented a problem. So Roger, you haven't presented a problem in my position. You realize
again, but all you really
I have presented a problem that Rody also sees.
All right, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do this one last time. Okay, we're gonna do this one last time. Okay. My position is that Christian God exists. Okay, and that there are certain things that are in accordance with God's permissive will. In fact, all things are in accordance with God's permissive will, and that there are certain things that are out of accord and in accord with God's prescriptive will. Okay, and by permissive will, we're just talking about God's sovereign plan, and by prescriptive will, we're talking about things that God has told us we shall and shall not do. Okay, things like loving God is that which is God says thou shalt love the Lord your God with all thy heart, mind, soul, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's what Jesus said in one of the Gospels. The 10 Commandments again are another good example of that. Those are things that God has told us, and that's like you'd say that's what God is. That's what good and bad can refer to in that context. Okay, so where is the problem in my position as I just laid it out to you?
And so the problem before you go, all I really want to know is it logical? Is it psychological? But go ahead and answer JRobin's question first.
Okay, yeah. So just in response, I think that the concept in terms of moral analysis of permissive will is either, so there's a dilemma. Either it's doing no explanatory work, or if it is doing explanatory work, it generates really unsavory results, and it seems like we
Mhm.
should just get rid of the concept. So,
Sounds like psychological to me.
well, that's a genetic fallacy. Like, that's a genetic fallacy.
I
That's
said
just
no. I
just because
didn't.
of
No,
where it comes
sir.
from.
Stop. I didn't say. I said it sounds like it's psychological.
Okay, how is that helpful? Tone deaf. That sounds okay. So it sounds like it's psychological. So what do you mean by that? Are you just saying that he's got like an emotional problem with it? Like this is the same thing as coming in and saying, "Oh, you're just triggered," or "You got your fifis up," or something like that. Like that's fucking useless. That's less than. I mean, it's not even useless. It's more than useless. It's harmful. You do that kind of interjecting something like that into a conversation like this doesn't do anything any good. All it does is cast aspersions on the person that's talking. Oh, you just had some kind of psychological block about it, or you just don't like the implications of it. The issue with what Roger is actually pointing to has implications that Christians are uncomfortable with. Christians struggle with this. The fact that JRobin is in the arena with a skeptic acting like this is not a big deal, that notwithstanding, does not change the fact this is a major problem, a major intellectual and psychological hurdle for a lot of believers to try to either circumvent or reconcile, what have you. This is a massive one. This is not simply one of these things where it's just like, okay, the atheist has found something that seems a little bit squirmy, and they're going to bring this up so that they can make Christianity look bad and call God a doo-doo head. That's not it. The problem here is that if Christianity is going to take the position that they have some kind of moral high ground and they've got authority to make declarations about what is good and what is bad definitionally, and then they have these weird tendencies to get into things that are, well, we're talking about good in the sense that it pertains to God's prescriptive will, or it's good in the sense that it's relative to God's permissive will. Okay, that really isn't that helpful. They've started to remove explanatory power from it. And the reason that they've had to do that is because they're trying to take care of other concepts that they want to be able to hold on to. And those things generate tensions in believers who want to think that when they're a Christian, God is taking care of them, not just after they die, but in the here and now. Now, if the theology is a little bit more grounded and more Christians simply believe that whatever happens to you, that this world is just a training ground filled with tragedy and meaningless chaos and all this kind of stuff, but after you die and your soul is separated and you go to paradise to be with God, there everything makes sense. Everything's good. Everything's copacetic. You might be able to get away with that. Then good and bad just seem like the kinds of things that happen in this kind of vicious simulation that we're in while we're living out our lives in these meat avatars, for a finite period of time before our real selves, the eternal selves that we are, well, not eternal, but immortal parts, move on to different planes, either an eternal hell or an eternal heaven. Okay. That would be a little bit easier to kind of justify. And I think a lot of people probably end up having to, right, in most faith traditions. But the problem gets into this stuff if you're wrestling with theological concepts of what God allows, what he doesn't allow, what he needs to be fulfilled in the world. That's when things start getting touchy, and that's where Christians start kind of stumbling on this stuff. And so for Tone to say, "Oh, you just have a psychological problem with this, Roger. You're not a Christian, so you just, I mean, that's kind of where I think Tone's going with that. You're not a Christian, so you couldn't possibly understand, or you don't want to understand because you don't like the entailments of it." I knew believers that were not comfortable with the entailments of the tensions created by this permissive versus prescriptive will kind of stuff. Caused real problems for them, right? And they supposedly had the benefit of, the work of the Holy Spirit's grace acting on their hearts. And yeah.
May I take this up,
your
Roger?
commitment to the pro-life.
Roger, I'm going to have to take you up on that.
I just said my view of what it sounds like. That's
Roger,
all I said. And then
Roger,
genetic fallacy. What?
Roger, I have to take you up. When you say it has no explanatory power, it's the opposite. It has total explanatory power. It has absolute explanatory power.
Right. So it explains why the Holocaust is good, right?
Correct. Again, you're equivocating the word good, but it explains why the Holocaust.
He's not equivocating on the word good if the word good means what these guys are saying it means. I think it's weird that they keep having to do that. They keep challenging their own definition of good. Roger's not the one that is equivocating or pivoting away from good. They are assuming that he is because he's not a believer. And they're trying to put that back on him. No, 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 by good, because they know how this sounds. They know this sounds bad. I don't think they understand that Roger, being somebody who's engaged in is engaged in philosophy at the level that he's at, doesn't mind the fact that terms can sound bad. That's not really going to be an issue for him as long as they agree on the term. But they clearly don't. JRobin and Curing Atheism and Tone Loc have all reacted to the way it can sound when you say abortion is good, the Holocaust is good, right? Because it sounds bad. They know, they recognize this. But for the purposes of this discussion, paying attention to it and keeping it narrowly defined, good as defined as that which God permits, it shouldn't sound bad anymore. And yet, for some strange reason, for Tone, Curing Atheism, and JRobin, it seems to sound terrible. Because anytime it comes out that way, they want to blame Roger for trying to cast aspersions on God and Christianity.
Of course, it could, right?
No, no, no. So what I'm trying to say,
wait, hold on a minute. What explains why the Holocaust is good, Roger?
No. Okay, so let me step back. So
Stop. You said that explains why the Holocaust is good. So what do you mean by good, and what is explaining why it's good? What is doing that explain?
The fact that it's part of God's permissive will. I thought they had already.
Okay, this is what I mean. What I mean is there's a very easily understandable sense of the word good, unless you're referring to some like functional definition of the word good, which it doesn't seem like you're doing. That's very easily understandable. So when you invoke the idea that like this permissive stuff, whatever is good, like there's no evil in the world, as Rhodey said, you're now introducing a concept or an interpretation of what the world is that's very bizarre, right? Because what you're suggesting is that there's no evil in some real sense of the term, and so a lot of people would resist that. And so this is not.
I got it. Now, is this so? I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, depending on how you answer this question. Okay? Is it counterintuitive to say that everything that happens, assuming that Christianity is true, is in accordance with God's sovereign will? Is that counterintuitive at all?
I'm not a theologian, but sure, I'll go with it. Yeah, fine.
It could be. It could be counterintuitive. It depends, right? Because there's implications on this, and well, I mean, even just the notion, the doctrine of the original sin and fallen man, right? If Christians really have a tough time with this, how did Eve commit a sin before she had knowledge of good and evil, right? See, this is actually one of the tricky things about this, because the original story is that man was innocent, right? We didn't have a notion of good and evil, right? But then Eve goes and makes a decision for herself. Now, according to some theologians and apologists, the evil that was so inexcusable was the fact that Eve made an evaluation for herself. She evaluated it based on her own understanding, because she had been told not to do something by God, and then the snake was like, "Yeah, maybe you can. It's not quite like that. You won't die. You'll become wise. This is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. After all, if you eat this, you'll be wise like God." And she said, "Well, that doesn't sound bad, and the fruit looks good." So she evaluates it herself, and then she eats of it, right? And now she's got right, and that was the concern. She gives it to Adam. Adam also eats of it. Now they both have the knowledge of good and evil, right? And the concern from God, or the Elohim, because it is a they, they're like, well, we got to keep them away from the tree of life because they'll become immortal and they'll be like us. That's the central concern. Not necessarily just the disobedience, right? It's disobedience, but humans are taking steps to engage in some things in the garden, and they're availing themselves of tasty treats that will grant them the abilities and the capacities of deities, right? But Eve had the capacity for this disobedience before she consumed of the fruit, right? So so that starts to break down the notion that people were ever created perfect to begin with, right? Christians end up complicating this process even further by stating that that is necessary for the story. Man had to fall. Eve had to sin. We're condemned because she did. She and Adam sinned. But it was necessary in order for God's redemptive plan for humanity to be carried out. Right? This is where a lot of this stuff comes from. It's bad that she did it. It's good that it happened, right? And then if you try to tack that kind of theological explanation onto, it's bad that that murderer killed that child, and then tell the child's parents it's good that your kid died, in the sense it was good, in the sense that good is just that which is permissible. In that sense, it's good, right? It's weird that Roger has to then turn around and say, look, the way that we're using good here really isn't informative. And he should have pointed out, I think he's probably too nice, or he wasn't really picking up on it at the time. It's pretty clear to Curing Atheism, JRobin, and Telno that it is coming off. It is sounding bad because they're pushing back against it. If they were holding to this logical, facts don't care about your feelings kind of, well, good just means that which is permissible, it shouldn't be controversial for somebody to follow up with what they're saying. Well, then the Holocaust is good. Then abortion is good. But they're the ones that push back against it once they hear what it sounds like when Roger repeats that. So not only is it not working for Roger, it's not working for them either. And when he's trying to say, this is a problem, they're just rejecting that it is, even though they're demonstrating amongst themselves it really is an issue.
It's counterintuitive?
No. I mean, as in, it's not counterintuitive. I'm
Okay.
the other option.
Okay. So all good means here, let's be clear, when I use the word good, and I'm talking about it in this context, all good means is, I'm just saying the exact same thing as I just said there. So there's no counterintuition here with my position. Is there?
No. So yeah, but okay, but here's what we go on.
So then there's no counterintuitiveness.
No.
The only problem
there is counterintuitiveness. Yeah,
okay.
no, there is.
So how is it the fact that it's counterintuitive?
It's clearly counterintuitive if you, I don't know how many times I'd have to say this, but I wonder if these guys will actually watch this. It's counterintuitive if it follows logically that by permitted it is good, when someone says, so that thing which is permitted, abortion, murder, in this case, Holocaust, whatever, is good, that shouldn't be a problem. One shouldn't just reject that based on, quote, how it sounds, because that just sounds like feelings noise, right? I think that's something that these guys would appreciate. One should respond to it like, oh yeah, that's consistent with what we mean, what I mean in this sense when I say good. Okay, then what's the problem? The problem is it sounds terrible. Don't understand this. I really don't.
I'm saying the exact same thing, except I'm just using a different.
Okay. So here's let me.
What it sounds like to me. Before you answer the question, what it sounds like to me is you're having a problem with how I'm defining terms. So it's not counterintuition here. It's just you just don't like how I'm defining the word good.
No.
But there's no internal problem here.
JRobin, calm down. Calm down. Okay.
There's no problem here with my position.
Okay.
This doesn't exist. We've gone in circles. That's why I'm getting frustrated.
Listen. Okay. So this is a methodological point. You can make as many background assumptions as you want to say, well, okay, yeah, when Alice goes down and she goes down to the hole to Wonderland, if we assume this about that reality, and we assume that, and we assume that, and we assume that, it's not counterintuitive that there could be a smile without a cat on it. And the idea is to say, like, yeah, if you make all those background assumptions, then I suppose it isn't, but why should we buy into those assumptions? Like, there's no, it's very ad hoc. And so just taking that and then like, hang on, just like, so park that to one side. It just also seems like you're getting to this weird form. If you say that, like, you know, whatever is in accordance with God's decree, or whatever he decrees is just like by definition good, we get to this weird like divine command theory, anti-realist
no again territory. There it is.
I don't know.
There's no divine command theory. There's no divine command theory here. Okay, there's no divine. You're again equivocating. You're just I'm going to jump off a building because you're driving me insane. Okay, this is exactly the thing I told you not to do. Right? What we're talking about here? When I say
interesting observation.
Is that simply what we're talking about?
I don't think anyone can make JRobin more insane.
Is that we're just talking about God and everything that happens, and whether or not everything that happens is in accordance with God and His sovereign will. That's all we're talking about. We're not talking about divine command theory. We're not talking about that.
Okay.
It's not.
No, yeah, but I love it when JRobin does this. We're just talking about this. No, you're not. Like, all we're talking about is the fact that everything that happens is good, regardless of how terrible it is, because it's what God wants. That's all we're talking about. Well, that's all you're saying? Oh, okay. All right, moving on. No questions, no pushback. Right? Like, the amount of credulity that JRobin expects from people when they're dealing with him is there's a big sense of entitlement coming from that lad.
If
not
it's
a
in
part of the
accordance,
conversation.
if it's in
Stop.
if it's in
Stop.
accordance
Stop.
with his
Stop. I'm
will.
going to mute you. I'm going to mute you. Okay. What you're telling me, if you're saying that it's counterintuitive, okay, that's what you're telling me. Okay.
Yeah,
It would have to be the case. If what my position is, what I verbalized to you, if it's counterintuitive, it would have to also be the case then that everything, assuming that again Christianity is true because you're trying to point out an internal problem with me accepting this position. Okay, if that is the case, then God letting everything happen, everything that's happening is in accordance with God's sovereign will. That would also have to be counterintuitive because all me saying that everything is good means is that I'm saying that everything is in accordance with God's perfect will. That's all I'm saying when I say something is good in this context. So in order for me to be saying that something is good, and in order for that to be counterintuitive, then what you would have to be saying is that everything that is a statement, everything that happens is in accordance with God's will. You'd have to also be saying that that is counterintuitive.
It was clearly counterintuitive when JRobin, Curing Atheism, and Tone Loc pushed back when Roger followed the logic of what they were saying and said abortion is good or the Holocaust is good. That explains why the Holocaust is good, because it's permitted by God. That explains why abortion is good, because it's permitted by God. They didn't like the sound of that. Why? Because it's counterintuitive.
The only other thing you could be saying is that you have a problem with how I'm defining the word good. Okay, and if that's the problem, I don't have to use the word good to define the terms. Okay, but the point of the matter is conceptually here, there is no internal problem. There is not one. There's nothing here that you presented that's internal.
Well, so I think that there is. Okay, so when you say that everything that's in accordance with God's decree is good, are you saying that if God decreed it differently, it would be good? That those other things would be good?
I don't know if I don't know if there's any if statement about other worlds. I think this is the only world that God
No,
created.
but this is a contingency question. I'm saying, if God decreed things differently, would those things be good?
In a world where everything that happens in any world that God creates, okay, is considered to be good insofar as it is what God has allowed to happen.
Okay, so the answer is yes.
The answer is yes. Again, all good means, this is why I have to keep clarifying, it has nothing to do with the moral value of the state of affairs. It has nothing to do with that. Okay?
Goodness has nothing to do with, okay.
Not as I'm defining it here.
Okay. Then in what sense is it useful to call it good? I mean, like, if it doesn't have a moral connotation and it doesn't have a functional connotation,
so again,
which are the
yeah, if good is, I mean, and that's JRobin is being dismissive here, right? Because the only thing that he wants to contend with at this point is the troublesome way of saying that good simply means that which God permits, right? And he just wants to assert that and then not have to deal with it. But the problem is there are other wills that have already been brought up into the conversation, and JRobin knows this. He knows that there's the prescriptive will thing, and there's some tension there. The basic one that I've been illustrating multiple times, right? Like, and even he would have it. It's wrong for that woman it was wrong for her to terminate her pregnancy. It was right that it happened, right? Or to keep it simply, it was not good for her to terminate her pregnancy, to get an abortion. But the fact that God permitted that abortion was good. That's what starts making it counterintuitive, because now goodness doesn't seem to be about just actions. It's based on who's doing what, right? You're every bit as culpable, whether what you did was, because you were told not to do it, right? That's the only thing that should matter for you, human. But if you do that thing, if you disobey and you do the thing that God told you not to do, that he doesn't want you to do, it's good that you did it, in the sense that it fulfills his plan. So now goodness, or how we're trying to use that, just in dealing with these two Christian concepts of good, become counterintuitive and start to bump up against each other in an ugly way. They're bumping uglies.
Two connotations that are used to express in English. Then I mean, what does this mean?
Good. I'll say this again for the dozenth time. Good simply refers to the fact that something is in accordance with God's sovereign will. In this context, there are other contexts in which the word good can be used in different ways. Okay, but in this context, okay, and I don't have to use the word good. I can just say the entire thing. But I would like to, for brevity and also for consistency with what the Christian worldview says,
right?
How they use the word good in certain concepts,
right?
Okay? You can have a problem with the word good all you want to. The point is that you're addressing me and my position, so you have to use the words as I define them.
So abortion is good.
But he did use the word as you defined it, JRobin, and you took issue with it. And now he's doing it again. Roger's going to say abortion is good.
But
As I defined that.
abortion is good
Okay.
in this context.
So good refers to the fact that something is in accordance with
Right.
God's sovereign will.
So is
Right.
abortion in accordance with God's sovereign will?
Yeah, everything that happens is in accordance with God's sovereign will.
So abortion is good in that sense.
In the sense that it's in accordance with God's sovereign will.
Okay, he's finally now not pushing back on this because he said, because Roger added in that sense.
Okay.
Everything that happens is in accordance with God's
So
sovereign will.
like the Holocaust, abortion, gay marriage, sodomy, those things are all good.
Yeah, I want to be
Yeah,
clear.
they're not
In a
morally
sense.
good. They're not morally good, but they're
Yeah,
in accordance
we
with
have
God's
no
sovereign
problem
will.
with.
Okay, so what is it? They're not morally good. Okay, so that's actually even now it's getting worse. Moral usually as like an adjective. I mean, a lot of times people will use moral to say that person's not a moral person, meaning they're not a good person. But moral, I think generally, the general definition as an adjective is concerned with the issue of right and wrong or good and evil, right? You're concerned with what you ought to do versus what you ought not to do. That's moral, and that's kind of the basis of morality. What should we do? What should we not do? How should one behave? How should one not behave? Um, it's even connected to manners, right? And to the point where even somebody like Stephen Fry says morality is manners. He just kind of equates the two. Morally good. So then what is it then? If so it's not morally good that abortion is occurring, but it is good in the sense that God permits it in order for it. So is God's plan exempt from the definition of what is quote unquote morally good? Right? I think that's kind of troublesome.
Saying the permission of those things, not the things in and of themselves, but the permission of those things are good in that sense. We have no problem.
God is good. God is acting in a moral sense now. God is also acting good in allowing those things to happen. That's perfectly fine.
So it's good for God to allow abortion.
Yeah.
That's right. In that sense.
For God to allow it. Yeah, because God is sovereign. We don't have any basis to judge what God allows. The fact is that the thing that God.
But that actually now that is starting to like kind of slide into the divine command theory. Whatever God allows has to be by definition good because it's just what he allows. Right. Okay, then how are you making a moral judgment about what should and shouldn't happen? Right. This is one of those things that pops up quite a bit with like what in the abortion debate, right? If you live in a country that has a secular government, right, that is writing laws for the majority of people, right, and those people that people is kind of a melting pot, right? It's a mix of different faith traditions and different ideologies. All right. So why is it a problem then, if you're a Christian, to live in a country where abortion is something that's allowable? Why are Christians so confident to come out and say this is something that as a government that should not be allowed? It should be made illegal, right? We're saying abortion is murder, right? And what we want the government to do is side with us and declare that abortion is murder. And until that happens, then we just feel that we're living in a compromised government that is what, being influenced by Satan and the powers of darkness or something like that, right? But why is that the case? If you live in a country that for over 50 years has actually had it established that the right for a woman to choose to terminate her pregnancy is connected to her constitutional rights to privacy, then God allowed that, right? And I guess if it's right, it becomes completely uninformative at this point to even really say that. Anything that happens is simply that which God allows, right? Anything good and anything bad, by whatever definition that we mean by good and bad. Any instance is by definition good because it happened. It couldn't have happened without God allowing it, and the only things that happen are those things that which God allows.
God is allowing, doesn't have to be good, but God is good in allowing it to happen.
One day God won't allow it, right?
Do you remember my?
Yeah, he won't.
And then it'll be good.
But that's
One day he won't allow it, right? In heaven. Are you sure? Right? Okay, so if you end up in heaven, and heaven is a place like, right, when he solves this problem of our fallen nature and our fallen world, and we're living in a perfected world under his rule, then he doesn't allow those things to happen. Do you have free will anymore? And is that a good thing? Right? it sounds like to me that the reason why that we're allowed free will, even though we can fuck up, is because it is a greater good for God to allow us to choose than it is for God to restrict that choice and just put us in some kind of world where we only want to do what's good, we're only motivated to do what's good, or the only options available to us are simply defined as good. These challenges have also been brought up, and most Christians just react to them. No, that's terrible. We have to have the ability to choose, and part of having the ability to choose is the ability to disobey. Okay, until you die and go to heaven, where this guy just said, and JRobin agreed, those things are no longer allowed. Those things will not happen. How does that happen without an imposition on our free will?
That's the thing. God's permissive will is temporal.
Wait, Roger, do you remember my first thing that I said to you in this conversation? That this is just how they define the good in this context. So under their conception, the definition of good is just in the background, and now in the foreground we agreed that this is the definition of the good, and those are the logical entailments of each.
Yeah, sorry, John Rapp. They've been arguing the same single point for what, 2 hours now? Yeah, well, I mean, I've been going on this thing for just over 3 hours, but this is an hour-long conversation. It's just about done. But yeah, it's just been kind of going in a tight circle here for a little bit. It seems like any way you swing it, God allows it. Like if God allows it, like rape, murder, etc., then it should happen. People should be raped and murdered. Yeah, that's and that's sort of the thing, right? Because if somebody tried to turn around and justify their actions, and well, I wouldn't have been able to kill somebody if God had not allowed it, right? Kind of creepy serial killer logic, but it's been that's been vocalized before. And given the way JRobin and Tone and Curing Atheism are talking about this topic, it sounds like that serial killer would be right. Right? Ultimately, it was good that I was allowed to kill all the people that I did. God wouldn't have permitted it otherwise. Right? Am I a horrible piece of crap? According to this Christian theology, it's wrong for me to do it, but it's great that it happened. So credit where credit's due. This is really fucked up.
Being the good.
Yeah,
no,
I guess
the point here is not JRobin. I'm not saying something against you right now. The point here is not to argue about what is the definition in this context, is whether or not this definition is satisfiably applicable to the way we are talking about the good in a univocal way.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I guess what I'm then saying is like that collapses back into the first problem that I sort of had, where it just kind of doesn't seem to me that this type of it just doesn't seem like this is using this word in the sense good then just seems to be a complete misnomer. I mean, like it doesn't really seem to.
What do you mean a misnomer?
You're saying it's not useful according to.
It's just not a useful concept because everything.
Why is it not useful? Yeah, everything is good.
It doesn't explain anything.
Not
just a word. It's just a
I think
word.
It's quite useful.
Yeah, it's a word to describe something else. It's useful, and that's the use it has. Okay.
No,
yeah,
but
like,
not
describing a concept.
But if it's
not useful according to what, or not useful according to who.
Yeah, according to what is good is a truth claim. Care to give your objective definition of that term, truth? Well, it depends on what your theory of truth is, right? If you're like your correspondence theory type, you believe that truth is that which corresponds to reality. But I think even in terms of like, if you're listening to this, good is just a token, right? According to JRobin, good as a word is just a token to describe these kinds of ideas, right? Good in the sense that God permits things to happen. Good in the sense that you did what God prescribed you to do. Or good in the sense that you did not do what God did not want you to do or did not command you to do, right? And that's another thing too. God, so there's a difference between one of the tensions that comes up here in just simple English, right? Prescriptive will, God doesn't want you to do things, or God tells you that these things are bad to do. But the permissive will leads to there's an implication in that God wanted you to do that anyway, right? In order for his plan to be fulfilled, an agent, a human, had to do something that otherwise they should not have done. right? And God is counting on the fact that people are disobedient and will do things that violate God's prescriptive will, right? So that makes God seem like he's a little bit two-faced, right? Because the issue that comes up here is like, okay, well, if that needs to happen in order for God's plan to occur, God is telling people don't do these things. But in the sense that this bad thing happened, God wanted that to happen. Did he want that to happen? Did he need that to happen? Well, according to these explanations about the fulfillment of his plan, it sounds like the answer to both of those is yes. But according to his prescriptive will, it sounds like what he wants you to do is to not kill. So there's a contradiction there, at least from the perspective of what God is telling people.
Well, because it's you're invoking the concept of the word good, which has a very common meaning among most.
Oh, so then good. So then you just have a problem with how I'm defining the word. That's fine. I don't care.
You're not even critiquing the Christian position
because it's not exactly. It's not the actual position. You're like it's not conceptually the position that you're attacking. So you're just attacking how we're using words.
Yeah, no, but
that's on and on for days about attacking. Okay,
that's a fundamental point.
Okay, look, Roger. I'm going to tell you right now. I don't care if you don't like how I'm defining the word. I don't care. So if you want, if that's what the conversation is going to be for the next 2 hours, we can just stop it right now because I don't care if you don't like how I'm defining the words because that's how the Bible uses the word that way. The Bible uses the word good in certain circumstances in that way, and it's clear when it's being used in that way. Most of the time, it's not being used in that way, but sometimes the word good is referred to, or sometimes the word is good is referring to God's exercise of sovereign.
I don't know that it actually is, because I'm trying to think in terms of like Old Testament examples where I mean, in a lot of those stories, the definition of good that's being really employed there is just simply it's good because that's what God commands. God is righteous, so whatever he wants done, whatever he does, or whatever he orders his servants or agents to do, and they successfully do, those are all good by virtue of God's righteousness, right? Regardless of the content of the activity, or whatever. I mean, God was righteous and good when he went to a bar to kill Moses. Real story, right? He decided at some point that he was pissed off at Moses because I guess Moses hadn't circumcised his son, and he went to an inn where Moses and his wife and his son were staying. I believe they were where it occurs in the story in the narrative. I think they're on their way to Egypt on God's mission. So it's even weirder if you take the narrative to be literal. He sends God on a mission to go free his people from Egypt, and then on his way stops at an inn to rest for the night with his wife and his baby, and God shows up at said inn to murder him. Right? But that's justified. It's righteous, right? I mean, God doesn't need a reason for it, right? God's righteousness, his wrath is always righteous. So
okay, so then if it's not about permissive,
so if you don't like,
let's get rid of that. Then you just then it becomes a euthyphro. Then you just have to deal with euthyphro, like and then you have to deal with that.
So what's the euthyphro? So are you saying it's arbitrary?
Well, no, because
What do these guys always do that? Do they not ever like? The euthyphro has been presented to a lot of these guys, and it seems like anytime like I hear them in a later conversation, this was relatively recent, and somebody uses the word euthyphro, and like, huh? Well, what's that? Like, something that you should know backward and forward if you want to get in discussions about this, especially if a Christian. That's the weird thing, right? Like if an atheist is going to bring this up, it might just be to tussle, right? Verbally have a little argument on social media. But if you don't really have a good handle on problems of evil, right, it's one of the bigger issues that comes up. It can be a massive stumbling block for new believers. So if you have any kind of interest in, being a part of a congregation, being part of a Christian community, if you've got believers, they don't even have to be new believers. They could be established, they could be lifelong ones, but they start having a crisis of faith because of an issue that they're struggling with the problem of evil. Knowing the euthyphro is essential to being able to handle that discussion. And the fact that when it comes up, it's way too often I hear one of these guys being like, "Oh, well, why are you bringing that up? What is that? Can you explain that again? What's that mean? Well, why is that important?" Yeah, yikes.
Yeah, then if it comes to this whole prescriptive issue, then it just seems like then you get euthyphro, and that seems like to me to be a pretty
explain the dilemma to me, please. Explain it.
I don't know if I'll try to do this as briefly as I can. Yeah, it's the idea is like, is something permissive, is something good because God allows it, or does God allow it? Or is something good because God says so, or does he say so because the thing is independently good? And in the first case, it would be arbitrary, and then the second case, it would imply some type of like antecedent moral realism.
Beyond God.
What did JRobin say either?
Yeah, like
what did he say either one of those?
Yeah, what is
Tone deaf's approach? I don't have to accept either of those. Okay, then Tone doesn't understand what a dilemma is.
good is defined as ultimately what is in accordance with God's ultimate will and nature.
Right. Okay. No. So then, if you make that argument, then there's a second order euthyphro, which I've written and talked about. So the response that you're kind of making is that God makes certain acts, say like omitting to rape, good because
exactly,
they derive
James.
essentially
Third
from
option
nature.
would be...
So from the idea of lovingness. And so the second order problem would be, is there an explanation as to why God's nature, for example, lovingness, forbids rape? And there are two options. So one is yes, there is an explanation.
Wait, what?
And if there is an explanation,
forbids rape. What?
Oh my God, JRobin's gonna get hamstrung by the language choice instead of actually focusing on the balance of this dichotomy, or of this dilemma.
Or like it's like an aspect of God's nature. That's the ultimate explanation for why things are permissible or impermissible.
Yeah,
right?
God is ultimate. God is the ultimate explanation for everything. God is determinist.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So if there's no explanation as to why his nature,
God is his own. God is. I'll say he's self. There's no explanation external to God. Okay. God is simply himself. Okay?
Right. Then it's arbitrary.
Everything emanates from
then
him.
It's arbitrary.
Then it would be arbitrary. I don't understand why these guys don't get this. I mean, these guys will embrace aseity like it's no big deal, right? But aseity basically is starting to get you into brute fact territory, right? And when it comes to asserting that God has aseity, he just explains himself, then the moral decrees that come from this thing are by definition arbitrary. But because these guys are allergic to the term arbitrary, because that sounds like subjective morality, which smacks of relative morality and relativism, ooh, capital R, exclamation point, sign of Satan at the end of it. They won't traffic in that, right? But it just is. It is the case. If you're trying to say he's say this is what he is, and everything that comes from him is by definition good. Okay, then it's arbitrary. You can't define it as anything else unless you want to say no, there is some kind of standard. If there is a standard, then it's some kind of antecedent moral realism that transcends that God. So he's appealing to an authority which is good, or he's appealing to the good which serves as an authority. He's fulfilling that obligation, right? And then but that's dangerous, right? Because then you can evaluate God's actions based on a standard of good and evil separate from God himself. In order to escape that, you have to say, no, God is what's good. That way, okay, well, if that's the case, and he's say, and he explains himself, no contingency there, he's totally ultimate, and no connections, no commitments, blah, 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 fine. Then anything that comes from him is arbitrary, even if it just happens to conform with what is good. That's the implication I think these guys don't happen to get, right? The first thing that they run with is like, oh, no, because I know what you're going to do, atheist. You're going to then try to turn around and say, if God tells me that it's okay to commit genocide or blow up the world with nuclear bombs or whatever, then that is by definition good. Yeah, that would be good. But it would by definition be good. But there's another way of looking at it. If this God only tells people to love each other and be charitable and be kind to each other and serve one another and support one another, love each other with like neighbors and brothers and sisters and all this kind of stuff, those things sound good, but they're just as arbitrary. They're every bit as arbitrary as the God that tells one tribe to go to war with the other tribe, because it's definitionally the case. And these guys just don't want to see that. They don't want to, because they don't want to wrestle with it. They want to instead, all they do is react to what they feel like this is leading to a punchline, which is an implication designed to make Christianity look bad. And we won't let you do that, you evil sinner, you filthy heathen, pagan, atheist types, right? Because it's not about facts, it's just about feelings.
What do you mean by arbitrary?
Well, it's the same sense of arbitrary, because the question is.
No. What do you mean? What do you mean by arbitrary?
So let's say that we say lovingness is a good characteristic for someone.
Stop. Define the term arbitrary. I don't want to hear an example. Define the term arbitrary.
define the term arbitrary.
Yeah, you just use it. How? What do you mean when you say that?
I think one way to think about arbitrary is without any explanation or reason. But I'm not sure if Rogers have this conception of arbitrary.
There's no external explanation or reason outside of God, but God is His own.
That would be arbitrary by definition.
That would be arbitrary. I mean, I think that
there's no external. If you're just defining arbitrary as there's nothing external to God
to explain
then,
it.
Yeah.
No, it would be something that has no reason. There's no reason or explanation. There's no system. There's no reason. There's no explanation for it. It just is. That is arbitrary. And if you define God as ase is that God has absolutely no contingency, right? There is no contingency to that being. It exists without any kind of contingent connection to anything else, which means it exists without a reason. It means it's arbitrary.
It could have been out like if God, so.
No,
instance,
that's not. No.
Yeah, that's arbitrary.
No, it's not that it could have been otherwise. Now you're extrapolating onto that something else that's not entailed.
Yeah,
so
how is it entailed that it could be otherwise if there is no external explanation of the?
Okay, so put it this way: imagine
nothing. The point here is that if God
stop. I asked a question. How is it entailed that because there is no external explanation that it could have been otherwise?
He was about to answer that.
Yeah, I wanted to answer right now.
But the point is, it's gonna things when we're trying to elucidate any explanation for anything, it's gonna ultimately go back to something of a terminus point, or it isn't. So if it goes back to a terminus point, then by how you guys are arguing this, you're saying it's arbitrary. Because
you're just saying it doesn't have a terminus. Yeah, like I don't care.
Yeah, but well, if the point is being defined as ase, yeah, and that point is the foundation for good, right? This never makes any sense. These guys want to they want to retreat into the idea. Well, no, good is God's nature, and so everything that comes from Him is good, right? But that just makes it arbitrary, right? But they think that arbitrary in this case just automatically means it's bad, right? It's not necessarily bad. It's just something that you have to reconcile with if you're going to argue it that way. You can't turn around and say that morality is objective. Not from that source it wouldn't be. It's completely subjective and it's arbitrary. It's coming from an ultimate mind, which means it can't be objective. Objective would mean it was independent of minds. So it's not objective. It's by nature subjective. And because this thing is defined as being ase, it's without any kind of contingent commitments or anything like that, then it exists without any, it's inexplicable, right? There is no there's no explanation or reason or antecedent cause for that thing to be. By definition, it's arbitrary. This isn't tough, right? These guys go run screaming from these things because they think it sounds bad. And yeah, I guess it is a little bad, at least from the belief side.
Why should I care? Because you don't like the fact that it hasn't at any point. Good. I don't care. I couldn't care less.
I think it's totally fine to say that it is arbitrary. It's just not very convenient to say so.
If by arbitrary you're just saying that there's no external explanation other than God because God is ultimate and all-encompassing. There's nothing that's external to God that would explain it.
So you're not using arbitrary in a sort of negative sense. The way you're saying it seems to be.
Tom might be onto something.
I don't know. To me, it sounds like it's a proprietary use of the word arbitrary. It's a very weird use of it, but if that's the way you want to use the word, I have no problem with that.
He was almost onto something there. Like, it's not a proprietary use of the term arbitrary, but it's not necessary. He was almost right there. Like, arbitrary is not being used in this case to be pejorative. It's being used in a definitional sense to describe what the thing is, or to provide a word, an adjective that actually sums up the explanation that JRobin was giving.
Do you think people will reject the idea that arbitrary means without explanation or reason?
Usually it means like what I say. Usually it means without explanation or reason, and without explanation or reason, it just means that you could pretty much stipulate any explanation or any reason, and it presumably does or doesn't have equal explanatory power. That's usually what the implications of that is.
We're not talking about the explanatory power right now. We're talking specifically about whether what God decrees is good or not. And the point here is that if everything that God decrees is good by the fact that God decrees it, by
Even though
his
that was
nature,
wood.
by his nature, right, or by whatever, but by whatever fact of God. The point here is that there is nothing that restricts God from saying or decreeing or having said something else.
Because it's not a logical contradiction, yeah.
And in virtue, well, not even that. In virtue of that, there could, if you believe that there are different possible worlds, then there could be a possible world where God just decreed something else and it would be good.
Mm-hmm.
And in virtue of that, it is arbitrary because there is nothing that explains or there is no reason for why God decreed A over B or B over A.
I don't even hold to the view of possible worlds because I hold that God is the baseline for possibility anyway. So
yeah, that's interesting. I have to dip out, but bye.
Yeah, I'm not.
Hey, Goofus, you're an atheist. I don't expect you to say it.
I'm
All right, so that was it. So yeah, Roger checked out. He had to leave, and yeah, so that really went nowhere. So yeah, I guess thanks, and I'm sorry. Good Lord. So yeah, yeah, it's an opportunity. You know, these guys have an opportunity to talk to somebody who is currently on a PhD track in philosophy. I think Roger has stated that he's kind of leaning towards like analytical philosophy. It's an opportunity. I think this is kind of weird that when these guys have an opportunity to talk to somebody who's currently in an academic track on this, Roger and Danny is another guy. You have an opportunity to ask them like that you don't have to treat these guys like they're they're just everything that they say can't be questioned, but it's good to hear from their perspective because they're actively engaged in some of these studies now, and if they're working towards a PhD, they're going to be working towards a thesis. So depending on what their emphasis is, their field of study specifically, you have an opportunity to kind of reach out to them and kind of mine them for information, for resources, these kinds of things. I almost never hear that happen. I never hear JRobin or Tone kind of, hey, all right, so you're giving me some of these problems. You're presenting some of these things from me. I don't think that these things are unique to you. Could you maybe share with me some sources to read on these particular things, or give me some names of philosophers who have wrestled with this kind of stuff, so I can take a look at this and read into it for that might be helpful. I never hear that, right? I mean, to hear JRobin debate Roger on one of these things, it's really no different than I mean, it's only slightly different than what I get if I go onto some of these particular channels. I used to get this if I went into Praise I Am's thing and made the statement that scholars do not believe that all of the epistles that Christians assert are attributed to the Apostle Paul actually were written by the Apostle Paul. And what normally ends up happening there, people flipping out, and then the accusations and the challenges. I demand that you come debate me, bro, over your stance, over your claim, over your research. Like, this isn't my research, right? I got that from an introductory level textbook on the history of the New Testament, right? It's just historical scholarship at this point, right? The people that study those books and debate and date them and are in a position where they're supposed to be determining whether or not this is the genuine article, or maybe it's from a different source. Maybe somebody was writing this under Paul's name. That's the conclusion that they've reached. That 7 of them are or that are kind of undisputed, and the rest of them are in some state of being very, very much in question, or 3 of them are like it's very definite that's not Paul, right? If you present that very straightforward historical scholarship consensus to some people, they will treat it as if it's your own unique idiosyncratic claim, and then demand that you, and then immediately expect you to be an expert on it that second, and then debate them on it. They will not ask you where you got it from. And if you tell them, if you volunteer that, which I did, I told them, whoa, hang on, you can find this here, here, and here. You can read these sources here, here, and here. You can go to this general source, and it has bibliographies here, here, and here. Did they do that? No. It's almost as if they're allergic to information. And I think that's weird that, like, you know, some of these guys have an opportunity to talk to these people and they don't try to, like, reach out and mine them for anything more. So anyway. So I guess with that, I'm going to wrap this up. I've been on way too long. I apologize for the length of this one. Hopefully this one gets some likes. Thank you, Jody Wheeler. Yeah, like, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. Got any questions, concerns, issues, anything like that, email me at jeffersonspashcock@gmail.com. I am going to get out of here and enjoy the rest of my weekend. I hope the rest of you have a good weekend as well. Thank you for the super chats. Thank you for an always entertaining live chat. Good luck